Morning, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board being held on Monday the 9th of January 2023. Happy New Year to everybody. A few housekeeping items to start off with. We're not expecting any fire alarm tests today, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible into your microphones situated at your desks. Please keep background noises to a minimum and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent, please. Don't mind whilst we're doing it. Others in attendance are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. But I don't see any public present today. Procedure and etiquette for the meeting: only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. For those people in attendance as virtual participants, can I request that they use the raise hand function within the system if they wish to contribute. But can I just confirm, do we have any virtual attendance today?
We do. Councillor Wilding is just joining us. My understanding is that Councillor Graham Andrews will be joining us via virtual.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Councillor Wilding. Can I just take this opportunity to confirm that you can hear and be heard?
Hi there, yes I can, thank you. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no problems. Welcome and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Happy New Year.
Right, so if we move to the agenda, apologies for absence.
Chair, we've had one apologies for absence, and that's Councillor Lester.
And, okay, yep. Any further from anybody? Okay, thank you. Name substitutes?
We don't have any name substitutes.
Okay, thank you. And any declarations of interest? No, none. Right, so moving on to agenda item 4, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. I don't believe that the minutes as published are a true reflection of what we discussed at our last meeting. Yesterday, the clerk has provided me with a draft of the HR recommendations that we discussed. So what I would like to propose is that this draft is circulated for review, and then we agree and update the minutes so we can vote on them at our next meeting, which is on the 17th. Councillor Watson.
And also, can I ask that the minutes are recorrected, because I couldn't have been present because I was in New Zealand, but I am, it is under absence, so it's just to take me off being present. Thanks.
Is everyone happy with that proposal? Can I see a raise of hands, please? Thank you. So that's the minutes. Questions from members of the public and members of the council? I don't believe we have any.
No questions from members of the public or councillors.
So we move directly into the meat of our meeting today, starting with agenda item 7, budget scrutiny. The Scrutiny Management Board has the remit under the Council Constitution to carry out the scrutiny of the Council budget. The process for scrutiny of the Council's budget proposals is set out in Part 4, Section 3 of the Herefordshire Council Constitution. This report sets out an approach, rationale, process and timetable for the scrutiny of the Council's budget proposals for 23-24 in accordance with the Council Constitution. So I would like to invite John Coleman, the Democratic Services Manager, to present the key issues set out in the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Sorry, everybody, my microphone doesn't seem to be working, but yes, thank you. So the proposals in front of you are relatively straightforward. They're setting out the scrutiny of the budget. The members of the committee are invited to agree the aims and objectives as set out in paragraph 4 As I say, they are relatively straightforward. Those aims are that the budget scrutiny will aim to provide a demonstrable constructive challenge to the draft budget proposals for 23-24, by identifying the main budget pressures and risks. The objectives will be to consider the Cabinet draft budget proposals, receive evidence from Cabinet members, senior departmental officers and other relevant stakeholders, and to agree a summary report of the process and key evidence considered by the committee, including recommendations and key findings. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. So I think it is a relatively straightforward report. I think it essentially sets out what we're doing, what we have done up until now, what we're doing next week. Before I go to any comments and questions, I think I would just like to note that we have very tight timelines. So I think our meeting next week is on the 17th. Our recommendations need to be published on the 18th for the Cabinet meeting the following week. I do not believe we will have time to prepare a Cabinet, a budget report. So that is one element that I think we just need to make an amendment to. So next week on the 17th, if we have rather complicated recommendations coming out of the budget proposal, I think what I will be recommending is that we adjourn to make sure that we've got them drafted correctly. We'll show them up on the screen, and we'll need to agree all the recommendations on the day rather than drafting a report. But I think for future budget processes, I think being able to, because we look at the budget so many times throughout the year in various different ways, I think it would probably be beneficial to consolidate everything in a report. And I think this is one of the reasons for this item that we're looking at now, because it sort of sets the scene of what was our scope, how did we do it, and then it would conclude with what our recommendations are. So I think for future years, I think it's a great template perhaps to carry forwards, but I think for next week, we simply just do not have the time. But if I can, any comments? Councillor Stark.
Thank you, Chair. We talk about the pressures and risks being looked at in terms of budget scrutiny. And one of the big problems we all have is the assumptions underlying the budget. And I would like to make it clear in the actual budget report itself that we've just looked at, that we will be scrutinising the assumptions. The assumptions obviously on inflation are very important. Assumptions on interest rate are very important. And even the assumptions on what we might or might not expect from national government in terms of support, we have had some indications, which does seem to suggest that it's all going to be down to us in terms of whatever preset that we might set. So I want to make that clear that that is one of the areas that we do need to focus on over the next few days when we do look at the budget. Whether we need to change a draft or not, Chair, I'll leave it up to you, but I just wanted to make that point.
No, I think, so under the Scrutiny Management Board agree the aims and objectives set out at paragraph 4 in the report, with two amendments, I think. One, under the aim, we're identifying the main budget assumptions, pressures and risks. And then under objective 3, that we're not agreeing a scrutiny report, but for the 17th, we'll have to just agree the recommendation.
Okay.
If everyone's happy with that. Any other comments, or are you happy to approve or move that the process for scrutiny of the council budget proposals for 23-24 be agreed as outlined in the report, and that the Scrutiny Management Board agree the aims and objectives set out in paragraph 4 in the report, subject to those 2 items that we've just mentioned.
Yeah.
So raise of hands for that, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's budget scrutiny. The next item 8 is Treasury Management Strategy, but I understand that Richard Basson, who is from Link Treasury Services, will be attending today, but unfortunately he cannot get here until 12:30. So my recommendation is that we move on with other agenda items until he can arrive. and then you come back to Treasury Management Strategy at 12:30 or thereafter. Is everyone happy with that? Great, thank you. So I think we'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the 2022-23 quarter 2 budget and performance report. The purpose of this report is to consider and note the quarter 2 22-23 budget and performance report and the forecast budget outturn for the year. This report seeks to provide assurance that progress has been made towards delivery of the agreed revenue budget and service delivery targets, and reasons for major variances or potential underperformance are understood and are being addressed to the Scrutiny Management Board satisfaction. I'd like to invite Andrew Lovegrove, the Head of Strategic Finance, to present the key issues set out in the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to give a big introduction, as the report has been to Cabinet, and I think we've all read the report, so I open it up to yourselves for any questions and queries the committee has. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to see a show of hands for those that would like to make comments or questions. One thing I would like to just note, the clerk has apologised that the appendices weren't published in our report pack, only the covering Cabinet report, and he assures us that for future meetings, both the covering report and all appendices will be in our report pack, so I apologise for that. But can I open to questions and start with Councillor Fagan?
Thank you. Is that working? Sorry, I'm not
now.
entirely sure if it's working, but so I think one of the difficulties is that we're looking at the sort of quarter 2 report here, and we're already into January. So, you know, obviously there's a sort of time lag there, and things could have changed considerably. I realise that we're probably only at the end of quarter 3 effectively, but you know, and I think that is a difficulty that we may need to address in the future, is how we deal with that time lag. One of the issues for me is the overspend in the children's services. So it's saying basically the overspend of 7.2 million at the 30th of September, overspend largely explained by variances in looked after children of 5.2 million, additional needs 1.1. And then the forecast overspend for 22-23 is for children's placements is 4.3 million. So I think in terms of the sort of budget, that this area is a huge risk area, and I know that you know there are lots of discussions about the improvement plan, but I think that the high cost of placements, and there's talk here about tighter controls to influence reductions in average cost replacements. This is definitely something that I know that the improvement plan is trying to address, but I think that we need to really keep an eye on this, because first of all, we know that placements are really, really expensive. A lot of placements are happening out of the county because we haven't got county facilities. Wouldn't it be more cost effective to look at increasing budget for reunification, for families knowing their rights, for actually supporting families on the edge of care, which I know is under discussion, then actually putting children into placements? And then there's also the cost of the care proceedings, and it feels like it's a bottomless pit actually, because the rate of care proceedings in Herefordshire, we know from sort of public questions and what have you, is almost 2 times our statistical neighbours. We know that care proceedings, I don't know the specific detail, but the care proceedings are really expensive. Obviously they're going to be expensive because they involve lots of lawyers. So I think that it's just flagging up that risk area in terms of our budget. If we don't rein in care proceedings and cost of placements, actually it could just be a bottomless pit, and we will never know where we're standing, and it doesn't actually serve the families and the children of Herefordshire. So obviously this is an area for the Children's Scrutiny Committee as well, but I just want to flag it up because it's so evident here.
Councillor Harvey, from an administration's perspective, do you have, would you like to make any comments about that?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Fagan, for the concerns you've raised. Kind of, yes. I think that the issue for me, and I guess for this committee, in looking at the Q2 budget performance report, is that the way in which the service is delivered and the approach that's taken and the decisions that are made professionally in undertaking that service are very much the remit of the Children's Scrutiny Committee, and the management of risk is, in terms of the subject of the risk, is children's scrutiny, and the process by which the risk is managed is audit and governance. So I'm here today. What we're looking at is the financial consequences of that, which you're absolutely right, are huge. When we're told that a full-time placement for a complex child in residential care can cost £200,000 for a full year, it's fairly straightforward to understand why we're really keen to encourage more families to become involved in fostering, and to have a broad mix of potential foster families to cover the range of different placement needs that children coming into care might have. But that's a huge difference in terms of a child going into a fully staffed up 24/7 one-to-one cover residential placement, or many-to-one residential placement, and foster care. And of course, foster care is itself more expensive than providing support to families to enable children to stay in the broader family, or to support parents to enable them to keep their children at home. And those are all professional judgments that are made in the course of determining what the right course of action is for the child themselves. But yes, we do have to recognise that there is enormous uncertainty in terms of what the financial consequences will be of those service decisions that are taken. And whilst being mindful of those costs, social workers are primarily focused on what's right for the child and the family, and the council bears the financial cost of the consequences of those decisions. But what is right for the child and the family must be first and foremost. So we do have huge uncertainty presented to us in the Children's Directorate, but also we have, significant costs across the adult social care, particularly for the number of disabled adults that we look after and are responsible for long term in terms of their residential care and placement.
So it's interesting, just following on from your points on foster carers, I can see that in the development plan statistics, it is one of the red actions. We're not meeting the target of, I think, identifying 25 new foster carers per year. So I guess it's trying to understand if what actions the administration are taking with the department to get that from red to orange or even green.
Well, it was our intention to have a recruitment drive on foster carers and foster families. Clearly that was difficult through COVID, and a slightly we had to rein back on our ambitions for that, simply because everything was difficult during COVID. But coming out of COVID, because we've been hit with the High Court judgments and the Ofsted reports, it's been judged that it's not appropriate for us to press ahead with that emphasis on recruiting foster families, whilst there are issues that need to be tackled internal to the service in terms of making improvements to the way that the service is itself delivered. It's been decided as not sensible to bring more foster families in on a big recruitment drive when we have issues to do with how we're supporting and communicating with the existing cohort. So we need to get that right before we press ahead with bringing more families in. And to my mind, that seems like a sensible recognition that we need to sort things out internally first. But the consequence of that is, as you can see, we're not meeting what at the beginning of the year we set ourselves as a target. But that's a pragmatic decision that's been made as a consequence of where we find ourselves in terms of service delivery.
So does that mean you expect the costs to increase even further? Because if you're saying one of your main controls to try and reduce the cost pressures of these extra placements is to focus more on foster care, getting more foster carers in, but we can't do that at the moment because it's not appropriate to, how are you trying to address, are we expecting the cost to increase even further if we're not able to introduce the controls that you've been identifying?
Well, understanding the financial consequences of reining back on the ambition to accelerate the recruitment of new foster families is part of understanding why we've got the forecasts that we have here in terms of the finances. The pace at which we can start to do that again, or that we feel we are on top of the issues that we have in how we are bringing foster families back into a more active relationship with the council post-COVID, and addressing issues with how we are supporting and communicating with them. That's very much a service issue.
Okay, I'll just revert back to Councillor Fagan if you're comfortable before I then move on.
Yeah, thank you. I think also, I realise that we're still waiting for the Commissioner's sort of report, etc. It's just a question about edge of care. If we know that we're facing such cost pressures, and yet, and one of the areas that we need to develop is the edge of care services. Has that become a priority looking forward?
Well, that has been a priority for us since coming into administration. Edge of care and preventative services were, not just cut to the bone, but cut completely in many areas. They just did not exist anymore. They were taken out during, sort of the 2013 to 2016, 2017 period. And those preventative and early intervention services, you don't miss not being there to begin with, but then you start to see the consequences of them not being there, and that's where we are now. So when we came in as an administration, we were very much focused on reintroducing preventative and early intervention, edge of care services. But they take, with COVID and everything, they take a jolly long time to bring in. But you will see with the budget, when we get to look at that in a week or so's time, that making sure that we've got early years and early intervention services there is a really important part of how we're planning to manage the pressures that we have as a council. But you can't just magic them up overnight. And, we need to build capacity in, the third sector and in, in the supplier market to be able to service us on that, because those aren't services that we are going to be delivering ourselves as a council. We will be in large part commissioning those to be delivered in partnership with others.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'd like to move to Councillor Norman, please.
Is that working?
Lights on, that's it.
Okay, good there. Thank you. And some of my questions overlap to some extent or have been covered by Councillor Fagan's questions. But I just wanted to go back to the. I mean, it's very much, the judgment and the difficulty is where you invest, how early, and at which point. Obviously, that's tricky and difficult and changes all the time. And the whole business of where the needs are going to be is unpredictable very often. So occasionally you'll get a particular situation where a child needs intervention, has very complex needs, and that's where the huge expense comes in, usually, particularly with the placement, as we've heard from Councillor Harvey. That massive expense can be involved in that, and it can be unpredictable. You hope you know your community, you hope you know where these things are coming from, but it doesn't always happen. So two questions really. Some's been covered already, as I say. One is, apparently we're holding back on bringing in or looking for further foster carers, but are we also holding back on a special training for a particular group of foster carers who would be able to support children with particular needs, which seems to me extremely important? And second question, sort of in parallel really, is part of the expense is finding placements, residential placements, often out of county, often involving travel and all sorts of things which one would want to avoid. And we have from time to time discussed the possibility of in-house provision of residential care, complex needs care particularly. Are we still considering that? Is that on the agenda? Is it financially feasible? Would it compare favourably with buying in, not buying in, but going to where the services are already? Does that make sense? Two particular points there that perhaps we could get a bit of feedback on. And really just to emphasise, can we ever anticipate fully the need because of these occasional unpredictable cases which pop up needing immediate attention, which can be massively expensive? And can you budget for that really?
Thank you, Councillor Norman. So I think Councillor Harvey, another 3 questions there. Councillor, if possible, please.
Okay, I'll have a go. Training for foster carers and foster families is, I'm sure, a large part of how we continue to provide them with the support that they need to feel that they're doing the best job that they can. And obviously, requirements change all the time, so staying current on what the issues are in providing appropriate foster care is part of that. That's, obviously there is a financial consequence of that, and budgeting to make sure that appropriate training provision is made to ensure that we are providing that level of support to our foster families is an important part of giving existing and new families the assurance that they need, that they're not on their own and that they are supported through the process. It's also a part of retaining foster families, acquiring people who want to get involved in fostering is a long process of dialogue and agreement. And once you have a family that has been approved to be a foster family, you want to keep them. They may not be fostering all the time, but to have them on our register and have them available is important. We don't want to lose those families, because the effort involved in bringing new families in is far greater than the effort that it should be to retain and keep families happy to stay on the register. So getting that balance right in terms of effort's really important from a financial point of view, in terms of making sure that we're not carrying the cost of recruiting all the time, but then leaking families very quickly after they've agreed to join us for various reasons. So retention is really important, and I think that's part of one of the things we want to make sure we've got right before we go back into that major recruitment phase. We need to be sure that we're good at that. Residential is expensive. We are looking at what we can do to improve our options in terms of having residential options open to us, close to us, and indeed in Herefordshire. It's a seller's market. We're not in the game here in Herefordshire. We don't have any of our own residential accommodation, and it may be that it's not appropriate for us to do that. But there are lots of models, in the same way as you commission to procure a certain number of placements, a certain number of beds, places, whether or not you use them in order to fix a price at which you pay for those beds, and that's very much a model that's used in adult social care. What the scope is to do that in children's, and the degree to which we can be sufficiently confident of predicting what sorts of residential placement we might need with sufficient regularity and confidence to go into that sort of long-term procurement arrangement. I think the service team is still sort of working through that, but is being very much supported with people in the adult social care team who are experienced at doing that sort of thing, and understanding what their pipelines are looking like in terms of emerging pressures coming from the market, coming from our residential base, and the kind of problems that are out there that are coming to us as new cases. So we are still looking at that. I mean, we have seen in the press that there are parts of the country, and I think Blackpool made it onto the news a while back, where a huge number of private residential care facilities have been built in the Blackpool area, and local authorities from all over the country are placing their children in residential accommodation because it's available in that location. So whether it's a case of looking to encourage a residential provider to actually locate a facility in this area or closer by, but also it's sort of getting ahead of the game in terms of whether we can secure placements that exist in Herefordshire but are bought by other local authorities. We have lots of local authorities who place their children in facilities that are located in Herefordshire, and then they're not available to Herefordshire young people. So it's sort of understanding that, and how we get the right mix of local placements, foster families, and where we need such specialised facilities that we may need to go somewhere else in the country in order to get the right placement for the child concerned. Unexpected need. I mean, this has been a bit of a bugbear of mine. We're always told that we don't. There are lots of placements that come to us that we didn't know anything about. They just pop up, and understanding what's happening earlier by using our networks, by recognising that our schools have really good relationships with families and children, and they quite often have a better understanding of what's going on and where families may be starting to wobble, other networks that are out there, so that we can better understand and maybe provide some of that earlier engagement, earlier intervention and support, but also to help to understand where families may be coming towards us in terms of needing more hands-on service provision and support. I'm a great believer in sort of looking at the data, looking at the evidence, and I do feel that even if we don't know about all the cases that we're going to end up dealing with, we have sufficient information going back a number of years to say at least that we know that we don't know about X proportion of the cases that we end up handling, and getting better at reducing that proportion so that the known unknowns become smaller, is part of building that better understanding and working with our networks. But from a finance point of view, managing that unpredictability at its most basic is about saying, how many unknown cases did we have last year that we found we suddenly had to deal with in year? How many the year before? How many the year before that? Is there a pattern? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What provision should we make in our budget for those known unknowns on top of what we see as, you know, our pipeline that we are already aware of? And, you know, looking at the assumptions, as Councillor Stark has said, when it comes to looking at the budget, asking questions about those known unknowns and what we think our pressures are that each of our directorates is facing, is something that we're expecting you to come at us with.
And is that something that is included in the figures that are presented to us in this report, or is it something that's going to be in our budget papers that we see next week?
Well, the budget is for next year.
Yeah.
What you've got here is a forecast financial outturn as at the 31st of March. So what our officers do in providing these figures to us and to you is to be saying, this is what we think we will have spent by the 31st of March. And that will include everything that we know about, and it will include an artist's judgment as a professional of what the known unknowns are, or the unknown unknowns that we will encounter between now and the end of the year. So there'll be a mixture of both in these figures.
Councillor Norman?
Well, it was just a very quick one, really, which I think you've partly addressed, and it is that dilemma of, I mean, for example, the unknown, always going to be there. Do you book a few local places, for example, which cost money and may not be used, or do you take the risk almost of ending up with not enough places and then having to place people further away, which is not great for the children, and of course probably a lot more expensive. So there's probably no specific answer on that. I don't know whether there's a policy specifically on that, or whether there ever could be.
Well, what we've been doing during this year is, as I said, getting support from the adult social care team in looking at joint commissioning and commissioning approaches to commissioning. But I think the majority of cases are dealt with on a case-by-case basis at the moment, but how we move to something that's more strategized than that is part of what we need to do next, alongside, committing to, building our own, care home for adults and older people.
Now, I've got a flurry of hands, and I don't know if it's for this specific point or if it's for something different, but I have Councillor Summers, Councillor Howes and Councillor Swinglehurst. So is it on this point, Councillor Summers? And then Councillor Stark?
Mine is not on
Different
this,
point,
because
okay.
I'm beginning to feel I'm at a children and young people's scrutiny committee. We really do need to get disciplined here. This is a scrutiny management board. If we're going to get into these questions, we need to alert Councillor Toynbee, so Councillor Toynbee is here to be scrutinised on these matters, not just Councillor Harvey. I mean, I can understand from the papers why we're talking about this, but we need to alert the right cabinet members to be here so we can get the answers that we want. That's my view.
You're 100% right on that, Councillor Stark. So if we can be swift on these points, Councillor Summers first, then councillor Howes and then councillor Swinglehurst, and then we'll move on.
Well, I agree with Councillor Stark on that one. We should have the cabinet member for looked after children or children's services if we're going to discuss it. But I do have a concern is the overspend. I fly by the seat of my pants when it comes to finances. That's never been my forte, even though I've managed the whole country. The focus is, from what I can see, the focus is still on what's happened in the past. And we haven't overspent on that. Well, I understand the reason for stepping back on recruitment, it is where we are. But I have to ask the question is, are we helping to move forward with what we have in children? So obviously there are problems. If we've stopped recruiting, or if we're not putting the money into recruiting, are we still heavily involved in what's happened in the past rather than what's coming in the future? And that's my concern. If we're overspend now, none of that overspend is going towards recruitment. I have a few concerns that we're maybe not making inroads into the issues that we have. So my question is, if we're recruiting, why are we recruiting? You've said that, you've already told me that, so that's a stupid one. But we need to be looking at what I call fresh blood. We may need new people coming into the system so we can take care of the young people coming into our system, rather than solving the ones that the past is something that's being done anyway. It has to be done, but we also need to be looking at the future, and I'm not sure we are. Thank you.
So I guess Councillor Harvey, if we're not focusing on recruitment now, when do you expect to have some of the other issues resolved so you can then start focusing on recruiting again? I guess if that's a looking forward to question.
Well, we are focusing on recruitment of social workers. We're wanting to change the balance of social workers employed by the council versus agency workers filling vacancies that we can't recruit into. We can't leave those vacancies empty. We have to have agency workers, and they're a very important part of our overall staffing mix. But specifically on foster families, there's a time and a place, and the time is we thought it was when we put the budget together and we set ourselves some performance targets. The intention was this time last year that we would have a recruitment drive, but you know, as I've said, the judgment has been that because of all the other issues that have come out of the woodwork in children's, the decision was taken to hold back on that and make sure that we're dealing with the families that we have correctly. As far as the overall plan for improvement and transformation, that the costs that you see in here are in part associated with that. You have got there is a separate section in this report which is talking about the 11.4 million investment that's being made in delivering the improvement plan, and you know, that has been reported separately in terms of the detail of what's happening there. But it's not that we're not recruiting. We're looking very much to get permanent members of staff, so that we can be making sure that the number of different faces that families and children are presented with in terms of frontline social workers starts to stabilise, and that's a really important part of making the whole process better experience for families and children, but also more effective.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Now I'm conscious that there's lots of other areas of the budget that we do need to be focusing on. So if I can go to Councillor Howes and Councillor Swinglehurst, and then move on to a different topic of the budget, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, the microphone doesn't seem to be working. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Try this one. Yeah, this one works. Yeah, I've got three broad areas of questions. I take Councillor Stark's point now about cabinet members being here. I think the only reason we're really talking about children and adults is they represent 75% of our budget. So it's obviously going to be the case we're going to cover those more than others. I don't think it's practical to get every cabinet member here, but what I do think it's worth thinking about before I ask my questions, if there are significant areas of outturn, and obviously in those two areas, then to get the appropriate cabinet members for those meetings will be appropriate. Where there isn't significant outturn, I don't think that'd be relevant. So I think that's the discrimination we should use and who we invite and point for the future. So I've got three broad areas of questions. I'm really looking at Appendix A, the revenue budget position, which I'm assuming is relevant to this discussion. Excuse me, I don't understand, but there's a gross budget and a working budget figure. I think it'd be useful to know what those are, not just for us, for members of the public who might be listening. I don't understand those. But if we look at the outturn is on the working budget. So that's my first question. So the second question is, if you look at the outturn, it's on the working budget. So with children's scrutiny, it's 7 million. With adults, it's 1 million. So it's 8 million outturn in 1 quarter. And 11 million outturn in the overall budget in a quarter. And if I look at quarter 1 outturn, I'm assuming because it's significantly higher than the working budget for this quarter, which I assume was much the same as previously, that means we're probably overspending by something like 28 million on children's services and 40 million overall, if those quarterly figures extrapolate. So a simple question, where's the money coming from? Just to make sure not only we, but the public listening understand that there's a variance, but we've got to find the money from somewhere. So those are just generic questions about the budget. And
Can I perhaps pause you there and just let perhaps Andrew Lovegrove respond to some of those technical.
I've got one other question I wanted to ask, which is more specific about children's services budget.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the difference between the gross budget and the working budget, if councillors recall, when you set the annual budget for the council, there is a set formula to set the net budget for the council, which then drives the precept calculation. So that's where that number, the 175 million for the working budget, that's the figure that council agreed when it sets its net budget. For those of you used to non-local government environments, you have a gross budget, you talk about your turnover level. So in effect, the gross budget is the turnover level. So we then have to net off a number of income streams versus the cost. So for a good example, we provide a lot of social care to adults. A number of those will pay a contribution towards them. So what you see in the working total is the net figure. So let's say the cost of care is £100 a week and the client pays £20 of that, that becomes a net 80. So it's a set of government-driven formulas that we have to follow, but it is the relevant question to ask. So gross is in effect our gross, including all our turnover. The net is the bit attributable to the council tax, and that's a formula we have to follow.
Does it include the educational grants we get as well, Andrew?
No, so the
gross.
The gross doesn't include the DSG, which is the dedicated schools grant, which is about another £100 million of grant, because that passes just straight through us. We act as the banker, we pass that straight through to the schools. So if we were as a Marks and Spencers of this world with turnover, our gross turnover would be approximately about £370 million a year. There's about £110 million. So it's through a pipe. All we do is act as a banker on behalf of government for the dedicated schools grant.
Thank you. Councillor House?
Yeah, and the second part of the question was, where's the money coming from? Before I guess that you wanted to answer that before I asked my last question.
In terms of where the money comes from, obviously the income comes from various bits where clients are paying. If the question is how are we funding the overspend?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
So as the report shows, that, and I think it's important to make it clear that this is Q2, so it has actual expenditure up until the end of September, and it's a forecast for the remaining 6 months of the year. So these are forecast numbers rather than the actual outcome. But as the report mentions, we have a recovery plan in place to parts of the council are clawing back that overspend and hope to, in effect, have a balanced position. But as the report says, which track it is in there, paragraph 5, any fundamental overspend we're left at the end of the year will be funded from reserves. It has to come from reserves. And the working assumption is that that comes from one of the earmarked reserves, probably the financial resilience reserve. So in terms of where the cash is coming from to fund the overspend, that would come from reserves.
So can I just clarify, what's the difference between the recovery plan and then the savings plan that is in one of the appendices, or is it one of the numbers are different?
When the council set its budget, it included an assumption and a set of savings that will be delivered. I think it's called Appendix B. From memory, all those savings were detailed, and directorates and portfolio holders are working their way through that. Recovery plan is above and beyond that. So we have asked directors and portfolio holders to work through and see whether there are other things they can change and influence to, in fact, bring the budget back into balance. So they are two separate things.
Okay, so the recovery plan, so if we've got a net overspend of 8.7 million at the moment, forecast to be 11.2 million, you've got a recovery plan in at the moment to address 1.9 million. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so Councillor House.
The last question was, it is specific to children's services because it's such a large proportion of what we spend, and it's taken the comments by Councillor Fagan and Councillor Norman a bit further. And I guess I'm not asking for an answer today, except I think when we look at the budget, hopefully it'll be covered. One of the things we all know is that the more we can invest in early help, the better it is, because we reduce the actual money we spend later in the when people really already have gone past the point where they don't need help, because they do need help. Obviously, we're spending more and more money on helping current cases and investing less in early help. We've raised this quite a number of times. I've been to the AGMs of several of the services that provide early help, and they're quite worried that the amount of money they're getting on the cases getting is going down, not getting up. So we are in a huge dilemma where we're spending more money on current cases and just not able to spend any money on early help, which reduce the amount of money we're spending on and increasing on current cases. And I know it's quite an intractable situation, but I just would like to get assurance that when we look at the budget, will there be some understanding of how we can make a transition from, and how long it's going to take, from spending money on cases now and investing in early help, so we can reduce overall eventually the actual money we're spending, because we don't address it at some point, that variance is going to increase and increase, more and more difficult to fund, and we could be doing something to prevent it. I don't quite know how, but we should be looking at that, I think. So it's an assurance I'm looking for, that we are looking at how can we change and transition where the budget comes from or goes to, and therefore overall reduce it eventually, hopefully.
So Councillor Howells, is that something that perhaps we can ask to be put into the children and young people's presentation for next week?
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
Great, thank you, Councillor Howells. So I think Councillor Swinglehurst.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Stark, but I completely understand why we're focusing on children, because of the sums involved. But a lot of this is stuff that hopefully Councillor House will be taking away and continue to monitor in terms of the effect of something like moving, signs of safety, reunification. All these things are things that should hopefully produce different figures going forward, and including actually pick up on a point that Councillor Harvey was making about provision of care and what role there is for the council in entering the marketplace there. So I think that's something that but it's not for here and now, but it's all good discussion. So what I would like to focus on actually is I'm going to move us away from children, so that's okay, and look at the Q2 budget performance, particularly the performance spreadsheets at Appendix 5 or E, depending what paper you look at. And just a sort of general note, if we could have the appendices within the report, would certainly aren't about. And I'm grateful to the chair for supplying the link to this. And the performance spreadsheet, there's a lot of grey. There's what's called a grey area, a lot of grey area, which is sort of unhelpful when you're trying to get a sense of where things are. So that's sort of just a general point, really. You've got sort of no data under all of the post-16 provision. I can't believe that we don't actually have any data, but it's not in the spreadsheet. I dare say this is, you know, as much of a frustration for Councillor Harvey as it is for me. So yeah, that's just a. I mean, there were just numerous areas where I thought I'd like to know more about where we are with this to see whether we're delivering against the plan. But there's just insufficient progress reported in the in the instrument for reporting, the VAG rating and the spreadsheet. So it's particularly EC1, EC3, EC6. Yeah, so just a general thing. Is there any reason why we have so many grey areas? And they're not very evenly spread as well. I noticed very few grey areas under in the adults, but loads in children's. It's patchy in economy and environment.
Yeah, I think Councillor Swinglehurst, I think all areas, economy, environment, community, and corporate, have undefined targets.
Yeah.
And also have actions with no updates, and there are some,
Yeah.
I think in economy that are red.
Yeah.
And still have no updated responses. So I'm not quite sure who to direct this question to. Whether it's Councillor Harvey or Andrew Lovegrove.
Well, we have a director of performance who's been brought in to help us with putting together performance dashboards for all of the directorates, but they've been pulled very much into Children's Directorate, providing support there since the summer, which has meant that the level of support that was intended for them to provide broadly across all areas hasn't happened, because we've had to deploy them into children's because of the urgency of the work there. Some of these measures do only come in once a year, but I would not give that as an excuse for the majority of these. It's just a case of resource not being there to be able to provide the planned support to get this detail populated, because we've been putting it where urgently it's needed to go. And that's just the reality on the ground. So, you know, the expectation is that we will have this information, it will come through performance dashboards and, you know, meaningful measures and metrics, not just in terms of overall performance, but in terms of helping us make sure we're looking at the right things to tell us that we're heading in the right direction, that stuff will be there. It's not coming naturally to people in our service areas. That's why we've brought somebody in who's an expert to help to provide the input that service areas have needed to get their heads around what some of this stuff might look like. It's all part of the broader project management approach that we're trying to bring in to everything, but it's taking a while to bed in, and you know, this isn't the way I want these tables to look.
Yeah, didn't imagine it was.
You know, we're flying blind in some areas, you know, and we ask our own people, how do you know that you're doing the right thing here and that it's working? But we're you know, firefighting on certain issues, and we're needing to put the resource in where it's urgently needed, and that's just the reality of the impact on it on other bits of the business. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry that information isn't there for you,
Yeah.
isn't there for us either.
That's
No.
okay, so it's a work in progress.
It is, I'm afraid,
But
so.
I think that potentially, I don't know whether we want to draft a recommendation around this, whether it goes to Cabinet or it goes to Audit Governance Committee. I'm not quite sure who it should be directed to, but I think we all find it very difficult to ascertain how the administration is delivering on the delivery plan through these reports. I think all the delivery plan actions should have updates, they should have reported measures, and there's, as they should have improvement and target figures reported rather than just green, orange and grey boxes, because I don't know what the target figures are. So it's hard to really get an understanding of where we're at. We've also recently looked at HR measures, which are, I understand, being reviewed in line with their revised strategy. But I note that the percentage of permanent staff has been removed from the quarterly reporting. It was reported in Q4 last year. We no longer have a percentage of permanent staff in our quarterly figures. So I'm not quite, I think I would like us to recognise that it's not satisfactory and it needs to be improved. So I think I would be suggesting that we do raise a recommendation on this. And I look to the clerk as to whether it's a recommendation to Cabinet or it's something that needs to go to A&G, who oversee the performance process.
I think, yeah, I mean, for me, there's a sort of, and this kind of relates as well to the discussion around children's, that what I require is a narrative. You know, this is where we were, this is where we are, this is where we're trying to get to, whatever, you know, that there's a narrative framing the decisions that we're taking, including budget decisions. And this is how that narrative should appear. And so that was very incomplete for me, so I don't get it. And I think there's, and it's part of that kind of narrative approach, that the point that Councillor Bolton's making about if something is dropped from or changed, that's part of that narrative. So we have a way of tracking backwards as well as tracking forward. So there's a note under EC6, spend public money in the local economy wherever possible, which then says this appears to have been deleted from the delivery plan, which immediately makes me go, why? What's happened there then? So it needs to be gone through in terms of, if you didn't know anything about this, would it tell you the narrative, would it tell you the story, in order to lend understanding to the decisions that we're taking about how we spend the budget. That's sort of, I think, where that sits for me.
And I think Councillor Watson just like to make a comment on this point as well.
And I just want to remind everyone on page 14, it's under agenda item 7, but it actually says about the aim and objectives of budget scrutiny is to analyse the key risks, to challenge how resources are prioritised, but to have the strategic big picture. And this is a key piece of work to actually inform our own budget scrutiny. So therefore, I think, to having the overview, and this dashboard does provide that overview. So the recommendation is, and I think to understand the boundaries between A&G and
I think that's important.
and SMB is really important on this point because of what is actually stated under aim and objectives of budget scrutiny, point 3, page 14.
So would the proposal, I guess, be to make the recommendation to Cabinet, and then if Cabinet believe that it should be referred to A&G or elements should be referred to A&G, we allow them to make that response as part of their comments?
Yeah, I think there's clarifying the role with A&G is a, so it's which way around, and it makes sense that it should go to Cabinet and let them, we can look at it. Because the other thing, of course, is the risk, the items on the risk register, which you've got, for instance, Hereford City Centre transport package, delivery with LEP timescale, Hereford City Centre improvement package on the major likely risk in the risk scale. So clearly that's an A&G issue, but there's a budget implication potentially.
Yeah.
So it's how does that join together as well?
I think the process of how the risks are identified and managed is the remit for A&G.
Yeah.
But I think the implications on the budget figures, etc., is something that sits within our remit. Councillor
Yeah,
House.
in answer to your question, I think taking what Councillor Harvey said about we'd love to do it, we just don't have the resource. I think the first question is how do we find the resource to do it? So I would suggest it should go back to NG to consider how we could help to populate these figures, and then we can draft a firm recommendation to Cabinet about what we do. Because I think if we just do it, it's about the budget, and it isn't about how you actually find the resource to do it.
But I think
That's the
resourcing is down to Councillor Harvey, not down to Audit and Governance. They don't have the remit, Audit and Governance don't have the remit of resources. I think my proposal.
It doesn't strike me as the role of this committee to decide how we do it. It's some of the.
No, so I think our recommendation has to be that it is an issue that there are gaps. We don't have updates, we don't have reported measures, we don't have improvement and target figures next to all of them, and also there appears who makes the decision as to what KPIs get dropped, because there are differences between Q4 and Q1 and 2.
But one of the things that is noticeable is it's very patchy.
Yeah.
So there are clearly some directors of departments or areas where people are doing it, where this is happening. And there are others where it's not happening. And I think what I was particularly surprised is the difference between adults and children's, given that there's a phenomenal amount of data now in children's. So it's just a matter of putting that data into this. Whereas, you know, an adult's actually is quite populated, but the children's, and that data's got to be available. It's got to be there somewhere. It must be. I'd be amazed if it isn't.
And when we discussed HR,
So
Tracy Sampson did have a lot of data to report to us, but it wasn't reflected in these reports. So I think we're drafting up some recommendations. We can perhaps come to the end of when we get to the end of the discussion, we can ask the clerk.
Because I think that will enrich our understanding of the challenges and the ambitions, and it's going to be so.
And I think everyone's challenge is how do we know that this budget, and for our discussions next week, how do we know that that budget is going to deliver on the council's objectives and essentially the delivery plan? And at the moment, this part of the report is the only thing that gives us that assurance, and I don't think what's in this part of the report is giving us that assurance. So I think that's the basis of the recommendation.
Yeah, we can't scrutinise the budget.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Councillor Swinglehurst, for that point. So I have Councillor Stark next. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harvey, if you wanted to make comment.
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to say, I'd like to remind the committee, this is the picture at the end of September. This is accounting period 6, quarter 2. So I gave an assurance to the chair as the consequence of a question asked in full council in December, I think, if not October, that I would be looking for these tables to be significantly improved for the quarter 3 report, but we had our resource pulled off to service a major urgent interrupt to do with children. So, but I think I'd also like to come back on some of the comments that Councillor Howells was making about the figures to do with the information showing in paragraph 3 of the main report to do with the overall financial picture. This is a view of the full year. It's not a view of the quarter. So it's not a case of taking the variances that are showing there and multiplying them by 4.
No.
That's the total variance that is forecast to the 31st of March. So, and it isn't the case that in children's, has the biggest budget of any bit of the council. If you look at the gross budget column and the working budget column, you can see that that the adults, the health and adult wellbeing, has the largest gross and working budget. The outturn, if you look at the difference between the working budget and the variance, you've got a variance of over £7 million in children's on a working budget of 48. So you're looking at something like a 20% variance. You know, I mean, these are the sorts of things that I would be expecting you as a committee to be looking at in the context of a Q2 performance report on the in-year figures. Having a 20% variance and, you know, 6 million of that being forecast at Q1 straight off the bat, you know, is, you know, a massive shock to the financial system. And that's why Mr. Lovegrove is saying the only place we can go to plug that in year is to fund that overspend from reserves. Now, you know, if I were you, I would be saying, how on earth at Q1 can you be coming in straight off the bat with a £6 million overspend on a working budget of 48 million? You know, what happened, guys, you know, in those first 3 months? And you know, that's the question I certainly asked. And the reality is that the budgeting process, which seems interminable, and seems like it's been going on forever, but you know, we actually had to start in July, effectively thinking about the budget that we're going to set in February for, you know, to start in April 2023. You know, that's how long, you know, it's almost a rolling process now. And in businesses, it is a rolling process. You know, and that's how it needs to be, and maybe that's what we need to get to, and it just becomes part of how we do our forecasting. That we push it out another quarter, we push it out another quarter, and effectively make our budget as we go. But what was happening in the autumn last year, as a consequence of you know, activities going on in children's, High Court judgments, understanding what the improvement plan was going to need to do to address issues that were surfacing, and also the increasing number of reports from families, partly as a consequence of coming out of COVID, but also as a consequence of increasing public lack of confidence in the service that was being delivered, was that there was an increasing pressure building on looked after children and the requirement for residential placements that ended up being reflected in the actual numbers that started at the front of this financial year. So by the time we got to the start of the year, there was a big pressure on looked after children and residential placements that the service then reflected in their first forecast of outturn for the new financial year. And I think one of the issues for us as an administration, and you know, for you as a scrutiny management board in looking at all of this, is how do we properly reflect through a budgeting process an emerging discontinuity? You know, when something is starting to go significantly differently from how it's gone before and how we have predicted it to go in the way we've started to build a budget. And, you know, that was a major discontinuity for us as a council, what's starting to happen in children's. And I think that's why we've got such a massive overspend reflected here. But for the future, we need to learn from those lessons where we can in managing how we do things to reflect those uncertainties. And again, when it comes to talking to us next week about the budget, and this is not the budget, this is the Q2 outturn, asking us what we're doing about, you know, mitigating the known and unknown risks is going to be a valid question.
Thank you for your feedback on that, Councillor Harvey. I think moving on, we need to go to Councillor Stark.
Well, it's not often you get an answer before you make the question.
Yes, exactly.
Although I wasn't going to talk about this, the one-off shock I was going to talk about the volatility in the economic context. Councillor Harvey, I'd like to refer us now to paragraphs 4 and 5 of the report. What concerns me, because as you rightly say, here we are at the end of Q2, and if you look at paragraph 5, even with the recovery plan that we've got in place, we're looking at a 5% shortfall on our budget. This is before we hit a peak of inflation of 11% in October.
Tell me about it.
That I know about that, and the energy shock and the energy cap and everything else. And what we as a committee should be asking is, what are you going to do about that? Because I can see why that one-off shock from children's led to a negative impact on the budget. But clearly, Councillor Harvey, and I agree with you entirely, at Q2 to have a 5% overspend, we need to be asking how much of that was predictable, how much of that was unpredictable or unforeseen, and what does that mean in terms of implications for the budget process? Because that 8.7 million, and I'll come back to my favourite subject, and I could go on to some of the points about that, that will end up hitting the economy and environment. It won't end up hitting adults. It won't end up hitting children's services. It will end up hitting the very services that most of our residents get from us. And that's the major point for us. This is what Councillor Harvey has got spot on. It's the consequences of this we need to be focusing on. And at Q2, I can't see what those consequences are yet. I can see when I look at Appendix 5, Councillor Harvey, about the 3 big blobs of red against economy and environment on investment in land for employment use. I mean, that's worrying. I know some of that money, Andrew, is coming from other sources, but what worries me about this underspend of 8.7 million is the impact on our resources within the council to deliver these programmes. Let's forget it's not just about the programmes themselves. If we keep cutting, we're going to be cutting not only perhaps programme expenditure, we will be cutting staff. I cannot see how we can avoid that. You may be able to reassure us on that one. So my point is, when we've got a 5% overspend at budget 2, what does that mean for the way we are actually forecasting, the assumptions we are making, and then the risk that we are then having to manage as a result of that? That's my worry, Councillor Harvey. So I'm full square with you in this one, but I don't know whether you've learnt from this, whether you can inform us today whether you're going to be able to give us more of an insight into what the position is at Q3, or are there things that you want to feed back to us that we should be making in terms of recommendations about the budget process? So I'm all ears, Councillor Harvey, and then we'll have a specific question for the capital programme as well.
Okay, well, a reminder once again, this is not the budget, this is the Q2
I agree,
performance report. So there's no way that we would look in year to try and close that overspend gap by making in-year savings in economy and environment as a single directorate or anywhere else.
Right.
You know, we've already said in this meeting today that the only place that an overspend of that dimension can come from is reserves. The recovery plan is what in-year savings we think we can make elsewhere in response to this as an overspend, and those recovery plan actions have been in place since we got an indication of this as an overspend at the end of Q1. So, you know, directorates have been being asked from the summer onwards to be saying, where can we row back on spending in different areas of our operation in year to assist with reducing this overspend? But the majority of that is going to have to come from reserves. You know?
Sorry, can I just stop you there, Councillor Harvey, because I don't understand why you have to wait until next year for directorates to try and identify savings, because if
We don't.
The
The recovery
but that-
plan is in year.
But the recovery plan is only 1.9 million of a potentially 11.2 million overspend. So there's a massive gap that you're saying we can't do anything about that, it's just going to come out of reserves. I don't understand that rationale. Surely, you know, if we were out in a normal business, it would be, right, we need to try and find those savings because we need to deliver a balanced budget. What actions are we going to put in place now in order to get us to where we need to be at the end of the year? So I don't understand.
Well, that's what the recovery plan is.
But the recovery plan is only 2 million out of 11.7.
2 million in a year where a budget was built.
But don't we need to
with a-
find 11
with a-
million?
Well, yes, you do. Yes, we do. The fact of the matter is, just as if it was your own household income, when you're hit with a big unexpected cost, you either have to go and borrow money from the bank, or you have to take it out of your savings.
Or you have to cut costs elsewhere.
And so what we're doing is we're cutting costs to the tune of 1.9 million in year. We're tightening our belts, buying blue stripe in the supermarket. And what we're doing is saying we're also going to have to dip into our savings, the earmarked reserves.
See, that's the point. I mean, for this committee, is that the right use of the reserves? I mean, that is the point. I mean, I understand the shock from the children's services saying this is what we needed in 22, 23. Oh, hold on a minute, we need another 5 million. Hold on, we need another 5 million. Reserves aren't exhaustible. And they're normally there as a backstop when you really do have crisis on your hand. And I would have thought reserves would be more aimed at the sort of economic impacts that we're having in terms of inflationary costs and pressures and things like that.
But these are all wrapped into this forecast.
But the reserves aren't exhaustible. You've got an NTFS. I know we're not talking about the budget now. We've got a forecast of 57 million overspend by 26, 27. What I'm trying to do today, and I agree that we are sort of strapped by the fact it's not the budget, I'm trying to see what the implications are of that 8.7 million overspend. I can understand why it arose, Councillor Harvey. I'm a bit concerned and disappointed why it wasn't spotted by those, particularly in children's services. I don't think it's completely unforeseen. I mean, I really don't feel it should have been. But nevertheless, we are where we are. And what I'm trying to get at for this committee is, what does that overspend of 8.7 million mean for us in terms of the services that we provide? And I'm not sure just saying that we'll take it out of reserves is going to help us in the medium term, because we've got another 3 years of potential overspends. And while the reserves might help you for this one-off shock now, I can't see how you could just expect to say, oh, in future years we'll just dip into reserves again. That to me doesn't seem to be a very sensible strategy.
Have I said that?
Well, you are assuming,
yes.
Sorry, yeah.
My understanding is you are saying that because you're only trying to find savings of 1.9 million. So there's going to be another 9.3 million that are going to come out. You said will have to come out of reserves at the end of the year.
Well, there are other bits of the council which are contributing to close that gap.
And I guess that's what we don't see in this report. So at the moment, all I see is a list, recovery plan. I didn't see any details of the recovery plan in the report. But all I see is that potentially you're going to try and save 1.9 million. But then my question is, well, we've got another 9.3 million that we're forecast to overspend on.
At the end of quarter two, we don't know what the position is at the end of quarter three.
It could be worse,
or
it could be
it could
better.
be, yes, we don't know.
So I guess my question is, well, what actions? I don't think I'm comfortable saying that I don't know. Is it appropriate that 9.3 million comes out of reserves? I'd be challenging you, saying I don't think it's appropriate that 9.3 million potentially will come out of reserves at the end of the year. I would be wanting to see action plans from you saying, well, this is how we're going to claw back that 9.3 million that we're looking to overspend at the moment, not just a recovery plan for 1.9 million.
So you would be wanting us to,
Well, I'm just trying
year,
yes,
find the savings that Councillor Stark is worried shouldn't be found in directorate budgets in order to close that gap in year from cuts made to services. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think as an administration, you need to make a tough decision. You are looking at we need to deliver you need to deliver a balanced budget. And at the moment, you're saying that you've got all this extra spend coming up to Q2 that wasn't expected and wasn't budgeted for. That's okay, we'll just take it out of reserves.
I mean, that's certainly not my attitude.
Well, that's what I'm getting out of this report.
Yeah. I mean, Councillor Harvey, you are right that I don't want 8.7 million to come out of economy and environment, but it can't keep coming out of reserves forever though. I mean, we need to have this debate, but what I'm saying is, and you're quite right, it's difficult to see how we got to this position in a way without knowing about it in some respects. I'm not blaming the administration, I'm just feeling somewhere that overspend on children's services that you quite rightly said was suddenly appeared in the first quarter needs to be looked at, and we need to learn from what went wrong with the budget process, because that's what I'm getting at. I don't want 8.7 million to come out of economy environment, but then if we take out reserves, we're going to run out of reserves as well, so I don't know what the answer is.
And it's your responsibility as administration to deliver a balanced budget. And I guess where they're now just challenging you and saying, well, I mean, we can't see any detail on the recovery plan. And so at the moment, we're saying, is it appropriate that 9.3 million just is going to come out of reserves? Because we can't do that year on, year out.
Well, perhaps you need to make a recommendation to say, can we see what the detail is of the recovery plan, and then you can take a view on it rather than shooting from the hip.
And I guess that's my questions were coming from. What are the action plans to try and reduce, mitigate it? Okay, there are action plans to mitigate 1.9 million, but surely you are looking at other areas to try and as you said, you are looking at other areas to try and reduce the 9.3 million, but we just don't have. There's not that narrative within this report. So perhaps that does need to be a recommendation.
And we don't know we're shooting from the hip unless we've got the information.
Councillor Howes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I personally, I have a slightly different perspective of this, because I thought Councillor Harvey's explanation of what the figures actually meant, which is what I was getting at, was really helpful. We haven't got the Q1 figures, so that there was a 6 million one-off hit, which couldn't be expected. Then that's exactly what your reserves are for. It's something that wasn't expected. So I think that was quite a reasonable argument from my point of view.
Or it could be mismanagement.
Oh yeah, well, maybe. So I think we all trust the question, what was the 6 million? And if it was a genuine one-off hit, then I think that's a really plausible explanation. That's what reserves are for. So I was quite reassured by the fact that actually the recovery plan is a mix of some savings and reserves for the one-off hit that wasn't and couldn't be expected, not the known unknowns. So if we should ask the question of what that 6 million was, so we are satisfied that it was totally unexpected and therefore is reasonable to come out of reserves, I think that's what we should do. But given the explanation we had, and I was aware, by the way, that adult health was a lot more than children's, and the combination is about 75%. But I do think it'd be worth asking the question, therefore, and it was helpful, Councillor Harvey, to my mind, to explain what the plan is. And I was more reassured about that than my extrapolation figures, which I said was that correct interpretation. I'm glad that you said it isn't. So I was more reassured than perhaps other members of the committee are. But I would like to see what that 6 million hit actually was.
I think we have two more comments on this. Councillor Swingle-Hurst and then Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I know if we're going to look at the details of the recovery plan, I think that would be a good thing. Then again, also for context, I'd like to have a sense of the reserves, the robustness of the reserves and the sustainability of that, because obviously it depends what the totals are and how other ways which might be allocated, and whether or not in fact there will be a payback over time. And I mean, that might be another way of looking at it instead of trying to pay back in the year. So that we have a sense of all the variables in the decision.
Councillor Summers.
Yeah, I think we're getting too far off topic. Budgets next is on the 17th, I think. But I think we should have a recommendation that that information be brought forward so we can read it before the 17th, so we know what we're looking at then. So, yeah, I think it's right. I think we need a recommendation, but I think we have to be careful what we do today because we're getting a little bit off topic. Anyway, I think there should be a recommendation for that information, but I think we need it by the 17th so we can look at it realistically as a budget then, but at the moment, no. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'll just look to the clerk. I think, is this more an action as opposed to a recommendation, because we're asking for further information?
Information request, yeah.
And we're asking for further details around the recovery plan and the actions that the administration are taking to address the difference between the recovery plan figures and the expected overrun.
And what the 6 million actually represented, the one-off hit.
Okay, and in terms of the learnings of why we are so over at Q2. And we would, is that everyone's understanding?
Yeah, I think one point is the action, to have that detail of the recovery plan. The other action is about the other is maybe the recommendation for learning. It's maybe a briefing note or what learning has been done, because that's the retrospective. One is going forward, that we need the information on the action for our next meeting, but the learning is the reflective, isn't it? Is that part of the same report, or is it, do you see where I'm coming from? Because I think there are two things.
Yeah, certainly the more details of the recovery plan, and then understanding
The 6 million.
the 6
The
million.
one-off hit.
The one-off hit.
Yeah.
And ideally have this before our meeting on the 17th, so we can go into our budget review with that information. Councillor Stark.
I have seen sometimes reserves policy, Andrew, I think, in the past. I think we ought to be looking at that as well, because if Councillor Harvey's right, and this is perfectly acceptable use of reserves, and fine, it can't go on forever though, that's all I'm saying. Perhaps we should be looking at reserves policy as well, and just make sure that we're happy as a committee with that. I mean, I think, Andrew, you have published a paper on that in the past.
Chair, the Cabinet received a paper with an annual review of its earmarked reserves, so there's already a paper in the public domain. We'll make sure that you've got a link to that paper.
If you have, yeah, thank you.
That's all already exists.
Okay.
Okay, so that's another action that Andrew will provide.
Yeah.
So then ideally, I guess we need it for Friday, this action to be
quite useful.
action by Friday.
Yeah.
So we have it for the weekend to, as we prepare for our meeting on the 17th. Okay, great. So I think, is that it on?
No, I had
No.
Councillor.
I did have a question on,
Yes,
point
one
on
more
capital
question.
programme.
Yes, move on to capital programme.
Yes, I will do. I'll try to be less controversial. Appendix B, Councillor Harvey, we have the gross capital programme in the first column. Then we have adjustments, which I assume are adjustments because of the, what's up?
Councillor Wilding has hand up, that was it.
all right, okay,
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. Keep going, Councillor Stark, please.
Okay, we have the gross capital programme, and then we have adjustments in here, which I think are perhaps slippages in the capital programme. And we know that we've had concerns in the past about the fact that, I think in this case, it was about 90 odd million capital programme, which 60 odd million will be delivered. My main worry here, before I just look at how it's presented table, is that with the construction purchasing index going through the roof, it may come back, that the more that we have slippage in the capital programme, the more we have ongoing costs because of projects not being delivered. But what I didn't find very helpful in this table is that the variance is not with the actual capital programme budget set by the council, but the variance in Appendix B is actually in the slippage capital budget, and I think the variance actually should be in against the gross capital budget that we've set as a council, so that we know exactly what the total position is. But I'll be guided by you, Councillor Harvey, or by by the accountants if that's not a good way of presenting it.
Okay, well, the gross budget is the budget that is originally applied to a project. The adjustments are changes up and down that get made to that original budget, which then become a revised budget. And that's why the variance is then considered against that revised budget, because because if you refer it back to the original one, you're referring it back to something that we know isn't how the project will actually end up being delivered. So in some instances, the budgets are revised down because they're going to cost less. So why would you then continue to measure a variance against a budget that is more than you would need, is more than you need to do the job? So it's as it says in the where the star is, adjustments include 2021 carry forwards, amendments approved at council, and additional grant allocations where additional funding is received from grants or whatever. Again, that's the reality. You wouldn't then continue to relate how you deliver the project to a sum of money which predates you receiving a grant to give you more funds to do whatever it is you want to do.
But it's going back to this accountability that we as a council take a view on the capital budget, and it's how we actually track all those implications through to how then we can then see the information in terms to ask, I think, intelligent questions on it. Because the end-year adjustments can also be slippage, can't it, Councillor Harvey?
It can be, and slippage occurs for all sorts of different reasons.
And as a committee, we might be concerned about that. I mean, I don't know how you easily make this table clearer, but we need to be mindful as a committee that there's a lot of information in this table that is not really shown as clearly as it could be, because you're not aware of how you've started from the original capital allocation to how you've got to the variance you've got to the end in that table. That's all I'm saying.
And I think Councillor Stark, I agree with you, because I started off, we had full council approve the budget of 99 million, which was then reduced, I think, by 64 million, almost straight away. And then, so it is now looking like a drastically different budget to what full council signed off on. So I had questions, about that approval process, but also how do we, at the end of the day, we're meant to be holding you account to the delivery of the capital programme that we initially signed off. So it's how do we track that progress? If I look at table C, from what I can understand, about 80% of, so we've got a section, project to deliver under budget or not spend full grant allocation, and then the grey is projects likely to be delayed. By looking at those, about 80% are due to delays, and then going into the detail behind it, about 80% of this variance is due to delays or projects not being progressed.
Yeah.
And then a further 24% of revised budget is due to be delayed for various other reasons as well. So I'm finding it really difficult, I think, as similar to Councillor Stark, to grapple with how the administration is delivering the capital budget. So I'm not quite sure if everybody else is feeling the same way. Councillors from Gilhurst.
Yeah, so just add that, so yes, absolutely. And the other thing that I had where they have a revised budget and how robust that is for the following year, which is sort of doubled from 66 to 140 something. So if we were wrong the first time and then we've adjusted, and are we happy going forward?
Can I just check which table are we talking about?
I think all of them. I guess, I was looking at table C, the reprofile budget details, and 80% of those reprofile budget details, which I think adds up to
Table C where?
It's on the appendix 2 of the cabinet papers that we had to go. They weren't presented with the papers
Oh,
to
yeah,
this
okay.
meeting.
Yeah, that's true,
So
that's
it's
true.
appendix 2, but it's also on the capital budget on page 36 of the of our report paper as well, in terms of where it's saying the original 99 million was revised to 65.4 million, and I think that
The
it's
65 million was taken out, and then others were added back in.
yeah.
So I'm saying that she had 65 million taken out, and from what I can understand, 80% of that is because of slippage and delays.
Yeah.
And it's just trying, and then we've added back projects, but then the projects that we've added back, from what I can understand, there's another 24% of those that have got delays.
Yeah, so it's the capital forecast, Liz, that were on the cabinet papers, and it was appendix 2.
So I guess for us, I mean, and we raised this last time, and I think some of these reports have been changed to try and give us the right information, but we were concerned that we couldn't see, based on the initial capital project that we signed off at full council, what has been delayed, what has an underspend, which is great because there are some things that have been delivered below budget, which is fabulous, and we want
What's
to be
been funded by unexpected grants.
yeah, and we
like
want to celebrate those.
Yeah.
But also, the council has consistently not delivered on a capital budget, which has implications for treasury management when we go on to that after this. And these tables at the moment, I'm struggling to try and understand where we're at in terms of the capital budget.
So what more or what different do you want to see in the Q3 report section on the capital programme that would improve the situation? Because you've got in table C, you've got a multi-year view of projects that are going to take more than a year to deliver. And you have a narrative in the reason column explaining what's going on. In table B, you have an in-year view. Table A, you have an in-year view showing the variances, and in the variance column, boxes coloured up to indicate whether they are delayed or whether they are delivering to a different budget due to changes in cost or additional grants, and that's the in-year position. So what additional can we provide to help you understand what's going on better?
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, for me, I think what would really be helpful, it's just like on page 36, number 17 of the report under capital budget, is that there's a very simple table, but
Hang on a minute. Are you talking about
I'm talking about the actual
covering officers report.
The covering officers report and the public report. So it's
paragraph 18.
That's 17.
Yes.
So when you're looking under capital budget and you have a table of the capital budget, but it's a very simple kind of budget, and the explanation given in appendix 2 for me is trying to align them both. It's like there's disparate pieces of information peppered throughout various reports, but it's just trying to get a comprehensive understanding of the detail of, for me, like for that point.
Well, that's in the appendix too.
But again, the way that it's presented, I think that it's about understanding that timelining. As you're saying, some are in year, some are going to expand out of year, but that for me is trying to align them both. So it's either expanding paragraph 17 and 18 to, give a greater explanation, but that's where I'm coming from, because I'm having to look at various different pieces of paper.
Do you want the detail in the body of the report, or do you want
No.
an improved set of appendices?
I think, so I
Yeah,
think,
it's the latter.
I think it's probably more the latter. I think table C, the reprofile budget details, I think that's very important. And I think that's very useful because, you know, my pushback is, well, we signed off on a capital budget, but in quarter two, you know, 65 million out of 99 million has been changed. And it's just like, so does that mean that the capital budget that you brought to us at full council was not very good?
Well thought through.
All thought through. So I guess that's table C is very important because it allows us to have that discussion. But I think what we raised last time is that when, which you've tried to address, I think this table, I know this is all very confusing, but the table where you've shaded the figures in grey and blue, depending on whether there's likely delays or there's a project to deliver under budget or not spend full grant allocation. I guess from a committee perspective, we were trying to understand what are the slippages in the cap. We have a history of not delivering our capital programme, and we're just trying to understand why we're not delivering our capital programme, and trying to get into the details to understand why. Is it because we don't have the resources on the ground to actually move the projects forwards? Is it because we're not scoping out the projects correctly in the first place, which, you know, leads me to believe that that might be more the case given the information in table C. But it's trying to understand those movements better. And I think at the moment we're struggling to understand the reasons with the information that in the way that it's provided.
Okay, well, can I use the example then of the strategic housing development line in table A? It is saying that there's been an adjustment of 8 million in the budget from 10 million down to 1.2, which is a large shift. And if you then go to table C, in the remarks column, it is giving you an explanation as to why that is.
Okay, but I thought table C, we started off with full council approving a budget of 99 million, and then table C then explains why 65 million has been taken out to get to a new position.
Taken out of this financial year. So
Yes.
some of it has been punted forward, some
Yeah.
of it has gone completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but we're now in a new position in terms of these are our capital projects for the year. So then we need to be able to see, well, what slippage and actions are happening from that point. Because at the moment, I don't see capital projects being managed particularly well because I can't
How
understand.
can you tell?
Well, exactly. I
Well,
can't.
no, I mean, what makes you say that?
Well, for us to sign off on a 99 million budget in February, and then in quarter two, already making 65 million, pushing 65 million out of it for some reason or another in 2 quarters, makes
quite
me
massive.
think about, well, what was presented to us in February? Sorry, okay.
65 million hasn't been taken out. 65 million is
Has
the
been paid.
is the adjusted budget. 32 million is the adjustment that was made. So roughly a third of the budget
Been
was
added back in.
was taken, was reduced in terms of expected in-year delivery. That's showing in the total column at the bottom of table A.
Sorry, Louis.
Yes, I know the detail is an issue, but the reason why I raised it, Councillor Harvey, is I was going to raise it under Treasury Management Strategy. It has implications for borrowing, it has implications for MRP, implications for capital finance requirement, right across all prudential indicators. And it just seems to me that the volatility shown here can be alarming, but there may be, as you rightly say, an underlying explanation for it. When I looked at the tables, I didn't find that sort of strand from the original capital allocation to where we were that easy to follow. That's all I was
Okay,
saying.
well,
Is there any-
the whole budgeting process for the capital programme, we have been working on since 2019 in terms of improving it.
Okay.
Individual business cases have to be provided by each of the directorates, and there was a cut-off of July, so the front end of the budgeting process, well, just into the new financial year. Departments are being asked to put forward what their bids are, what their proposals are for their capital, for new capital programmes for the following year. And business cases have to be provided now, which wasn't previously the case. So they have to have gone into some detail in thinking about them. Those business cases are then evaluated over the autumn, and some are rejected and others are accepted as new programmes to go into the capital programme for the following year's budget. Alongside doing that, for new capital programmes, all the projects that are in the existing capital programme are being managed through the Project Management Office or supported by the Project Management Office, but being managed in the service delivery areas, depending on what the right thing to do is, and it's a judgment case by case where the lead needs to come from. But those are then forecast on a monthly basis, and those forecasts are scrutinised by programme delivery boards, which sit for each of the directorates. And those are overseen by the leadership team to make sure that that those figures are believed and are accurate. If they are adjusted because the actual delivery of the project doesn't tally with how it was planned to be delivered, because no plan survives first engagement with the enemy. That is the new reality, and that is then the plan to which the project is delivered, and that revised plan is the one against which progress is reported through the programme management boards on a monthly basis. I mean, if as a committee you wish to get into the detail of how the capital programme is managed end to end, you're very welcome.
So, Councillor Harvey, if I can just stop you there. I appreciate the process. You've been looking at the process. I guess for us, we're struggling with trying to hold you account to the progress of the approved capital budget and the reporting against that through these reports. And I think they're not delivering the information, because if I look at table 18 on page 36 of our report pack, we started off with a council approved budget of 99 million, and then already in quarter two, I don't have the quarter one figures, I don't know if this was done in quarter one, but we then reprofiled 64 million and essentially deferred 64 million of spend. We had another 6 million of other approved movements, and then had projects carried forward from the prior year of 26 million, additional grants of 9 million to give us a revised capital budget of 65. So
It's a third change. I mean, the process might be robust, but the original programme allocation seems to be very uncertain in a way in terms of what we end up with. That's all.
And my issue is about presentation, because it's like having this table and this paper under the officer's report, then there's the table 2, but actually the Q2 budget papers on Appendix 5 relate to the tables as well, but they're different colourings because of the deliverables. So it's like, can then the Appendix 2 be put in the same colours as Appendix 5 in terms of where we're redlining or amber, or I suppose it's trying to find the consistency in the story where it's understanding one to another.
It's all entirely consistent. The numbers that you see in that summary table are present in those detailed appendices. You're right, it's complicated. It is complicated, yeah? That's why as your Scrutiny Management Board are scrutinising it.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand how to interpret the information, then maybe as a board you need a separate session on that.
Well, I mean, I think we're all intelligent people, Councillor Harvey, and I think, perhaps, Andrew, maybe we do need to have a separate session in terms of how can we improve these reports, because, I mean, there are two issues, I think, as a scrutiny board we need to be looking at. One, how can we be reprofiling such a massive part of the initial approved budget so early on in the year is one thing, but then secondly, how are you then delivering on the capital in a clear way? How are you then delivering on the capital projects for the rest of the year? Which ones are we clearly delivering under budget because everyone's done a fantastic job? Which ones are slipping because of delays, because we don't have resources or etc. And which one, it's not particularly clear. So I think we perhaps need to regroup perhaps with you and maybe Andrew Lovegrove and Rachel to see whether we can get better reporting, because I think if we can't understand it, the public will have absolutely no idea of understanding it and being able to decipher what's in these figures, because as you said, it is very complicated, and I think we just need to put a bit more thought around it. Councillor Summers.
Well, frankly, I don't think I'll get the last half hour back. I'm not sure where this is going, the direction it was going. If somebody was trying to make brownie points, I don't know, but totally disagree with the last frame of questioning. I do have a question though, which is a concern for me, and this is back to the little things, like why are we taking things in-house? Are we doing business cases on the stuff we're taking in-house? We've taken in PROWs, we're giving Hoople more work. I'd like to see some breakdowns on that, on what is costing us, and if it's not costing us anything, because that would affect budgets at the end of the day. So rather than go on this, what we've just been going through, I'd like to know what bringing in the PROWs into house, what it's cost us, if it's saved us anything, what Hoople has done, if it's costing us or saving us anything. Those are the questions I need to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Summers. And I know we do have Hoople on our March agenda, so certainly we can try and address some of those questions that you have when we look at Hoople in a bit more detail. So I think we need to move on this point.
Yeah, I think so
we
too.
need, I think the methodology that, in terms of the way that the figures are being pulled together, I don't think we necessarily have an issue with that. It's just how they're presented and how we can help us scrutinise the delivery of the capital budgets. So I think if we can take that one, I don't know whether it's an action to take it offline to try and Councillor Stark.
I accept what Councillor Summers said, but my point still remains the same. How robust is the original forecast for the capital programmes presented to the council? We as councils have a right to ask that question, Councillor Summers. And looking at the picture of this, there's a lot of volatility here, and I'm saying, should we believe that 99 million that was presented to us? That's all I'm saying as a council when it comes to us. When we end up down to 65 million within a very short period of time, that's all I'm asking.
So I think, Councillor Harvey, if you can respond to that specific point, and then I think we'll have an action to take beyond this meeting to perhaps look at how it's presented. So for our Q3 reports, we can get a greater understanding. But Councillor Harvey, if you can just respond to Councillor. Yes, if I can just ask Councillor Harvey to respond to Councillor Stark's point first, and then we'll go to Councillor Summers.
Okay, well, in the autumn of 2021, when this capital programme was constructed, the amount of interrogation and investigation and assessment of the business cases that were put forward at that time led to us believing that the programme that was presented was genuinely needed by the service areas and was, we were told by the service areas, was deliverable. Now, you know, that was in the autumn of 2021. We're now in January 2023, and we're looking at a forecast that was made in September 2022, so halfway through the delivery year, where some adjustments had been made to the likely delivery profile for those projects. Now, you're quite right, Councillor Stark, you know, it does impact, depending on where the money's coming from, for each one of these projects, and they're all slightly different, on what we need to borrow, what we might be able to borrow from ourselves in terms of our cash holdings, treasury management and all the rest of it. And that's why towards the end of the year, it's possible to understand whether some of the cost of borrowing that had been expected to go against the capital programme is not going to be incurred, and therefore is going to be a saving, which can help to offset some of the overspends elsewhere in the council. But at the beginning of the year, and when the budget's set in February, everybody genuinely believes and that the capital programme presented to council is both deliverable and necessary for this council. It doesn't always, across the entirety of the programme, end up being either the right thing to do or deliverable in the originally conceived timescales. But again, that's the reality of delivering things on the ground. I think if you look back over a number of years, the capital programme is never delivered as it's anticipated, and the variances and adjustments that have needed to be made in years past have been significant, more significant than even the ones here. We can do better in terms of tightening up on this, but if it transpires, as with super hubs, that the service area says, actually, you know, because of COVID and because of the way in which Talk Community is rolling out and bubbling up, you know, organically from community-led engagement bottom up, we're actually going to hold back on taking the super hubs forward, because we might actually want to do it in a slightly different way. And so that whole 2 million was taken out of this current year's programme, because the service area said, actually, you know, the level of engagement we've had bottom up from communities is making us want to have a bit of a rethink about what the best way to spend this money is going to be. And so pragmatically, that was the right decision. As one example of needing to make 100% adjustment on not spending that money this year, but maybe spending it slightly differently in the coming year.
But we're talking about 66% of the budget that was initially signed off.
No, we've
Well,
only
we're talking about-
adjusted 32 out of 90 odd, so that's a third.
Well, you started off with 99, then you adjusted 65, and then you had all these additions back to get an overall end figure, which is only 34 odd difference. But you made 64 million worth of adjustments to the 99, because that's what's outlined in Table C, which reflects 66% of the originally signed off budget. So if such a large portion is having to be adjusted, then maybe, and you're saying, well, at that time you thought that everything was going to be delivered, does that mean then the methodology of developing our capital budget is flawed?
I don't think it's flawed. I think it can always be improved, and maybe there is more evidence that's required and more thinking up front before the business cases are approved. But it is a balancing act, because all of the work that needs to be done before a business case is approved is covered under revenue by the service areas. And so there has to be the capacity to do that work under revenue before a capital programme is actually approved. So it's getting the balance right between doing enough work to be confident that this is the right thing to do for the right amount of money, and we've got a good understanding of what it's going to take from a timeline point of view to deliver on it. And, you know, there just simply not being the capacity in the team to get to that point in order to unlock the capital funds.
So is there any recommendation or that we should be making now for this budget period, or we've missed this, that we're meant to be reviewing next week, and the capital budgets that are included, or should we be thinking about something for future
yes.
periods? I mean, is there anything that anyone wanted to articulate?
Well, there are a number of new programmes that are proposed for the capital programme that will be coming as part of the budget to you next week. All of them have business cases that have been worked up by the business areas. Are you as a committee wanting to see that information in advance of the 17th?
Well, I think perhaps the capital discussion that we're having now, I think we can perhaps, when we look at the capital budget next week, we can maybe raise some of those questions, and if a recommendation comes out of it then that perhaps could go forwards for a process. I mean, we're too late for this year, but perhaps for next year. I think there is an action plan, though, for us to perhaps work with Councillor Harvey and Andrew to improve the reports that are coming to us about the capital programme, so we can better understand it and make more intelligent, pose more intelligent questions around that.
Would you like a description of the process that is followed to arrive at the capital programme, and a description of how the programme is managed in terms of its delivery?
I think a brief description for next week when we look at the capital budget, I think that would be very helpful, Councillor Harvey. Yes.
Okay.
Another action plan. So I think there were a couple of hands. I had Councillor Wilding. I apologise, Councillor Wilding, we've left you hanging for quite a long time. And then I believe we have Councillor Summers, and then we will try and then Councillor Watson, and then we'll try and wrap up.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it was a while and I lowered my hand because I thought we'd gone past it. But I guess listening to what everybody was saying, I was just wondering if there's a department in the council that is just charged with looking at ways of us maximising income or making savings in a sort of a blue sky way. I realise all departments are constantly looking at ways they can help their own department in those areas, but I just wonder if they're a bit stuck in a rut, and that is there some way of bringing in a fresh view regularly to try and find ways to maximise any savings or maximise any earnings. I mean, I was looking at for instance, in waste, I see there's that suggestion of cancelling the bank holiday collections in order to save some money. And there's also a few things about small holiday lets or small businesses. And that's an example, I think, of, I mean, that idea of cancelling a bank holiday collection, it seems like it's just, you know, why don't we do that? And it seems like a reasonable thing to do to save a bit of money. And I just wondered if why that hadn't been thought of before, and why, and if it is something that's just somebody's just thought up, how come we haven't got that same sort of thinking about other things. But I do totally understand that all departments are constantly looking at how they can help things. But I just wanted to bring out one very small little thing which I personally experience, which, if scaled up, still doesn't solve our problem of trying to find £8 million or whatever. But running a small holiday business, I'm asked by the council, in terms of my waste, to buy a roll of plastic sacks per year for about £80, which I do, no problem. But we don't use the sacks because we've got loads of room in our ordinary wheelie bins to put this rubbish that comes from our guests in our holiday home. Because we're already very efficient at how we organise our recycling and our rubbish. And there are lots and lots of small holiday homes throughout Herefordshire. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're all doing the same thing. They're paying 80 quid for a roll of sacks, and then they're just putting their rubbish in their wheelie bin. And so we've got like 10 rolls of sacks in our shed, plastic sacks, which the councillors had to pay for, and has been shipped around the country and manufactured, etc., etc. And you multiply that by the number of small holiday businesses in the council, in the county, and you think, well, it's obviously not 8 million, but it's an indication of areas where we could actually tighten up with benefits for the holiday owners and the council. I mean, we'd happily pay more than £80. We'd pay £100, say, and we wouldn't have the sacks. So
I think that's a very good point, Councillor Wilding. Maybe Mr Lovegrove, if you can perhaps just explain to us how within the council, say if there is anyone specific, or Councillor Harvey.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the specifics of the sacks for your business waste, because that's how the holiday home waste would be being treated. You're effectively being charged for collection of business waste. You don't have to have the sacks. You know, I'm sure the council could just charge.
So I have to interrupt you there. We do have to have the sacks. I've asked many times if we could just not have the sacks, and what happens is they say, no, you've got to take the sacks.
I think the sacks are very specific, and I think is beyond the remit of the Assembly at the moment. So Councillor Harvey, if you could please focus on the more strategic question in terms of if there's someone within the council that identifies savings, and how, I think the broader question that Councillor Wilding has picked up, and then I think we could perhaps pick the sacks up at another time, if possible, please.
Well, all the directorates and the service areas within them are at slightly different points on a journey, as it's referred to, in looking at how they deliver services differently. And there has been some quite transformational work done in the adults directorate in terms of delivering services differently, managing pressures successfully to try and keep a handle on the overall cost of delivering adult social care. The directors of both economy and environment and children's are both delivering transformational change programmes within their service areas, some of which are linked to the improvement plan in children's and doing things differently that way. In the economy and environment directorate, it's about taking advantage of delivering services in new ways, some of them enabled by digital technology. And we have also brought in PricewaterhouseCoopers to provide us with some consultancy work on helping to scope the digital transformation programme, and using their expertise and knowledge of working with other local authorities who have been successful in implementing service change and service transformation programmes, to help us understand where we can similarly benefit from such successful programmes. And they're coming forward with a number of ideas which are helping us to identify what are lower risk options for us in looking to deliver savings, which you will see in the budget next week, with a degree of confidence. And that again is back to Councillor Stark's assumptions and how we are evidencing the risk associated with those assumptions, and how we're building that into the budget for next year. But yes, we both ask our own service areas who are in touch with colleagues in other authorities on how we might be working better and differently all the time. And we're also bringing in external expertise to give us a completely fresh pair of eyes perspective on how we might be doing things.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey, that was a great response. I've got two more people, I think, then we'll wrap up for this section. Councillor Summers and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I think the line of questioning has been good, except I think it's gone overboard a little bit, but I think it should be actioned, and I agree with that, okay? It's something that while I would like to see action, and I've mentioned, but it was just put aside till March, I'd like to start seeing business cases for when we start doing things, like when we start bringing in things from bringing in-house, etc. We need to see a business plan, and members need to see a business plan before it's actually put into place, because I'd like to see what it's costing, where the money's coming from, etc., etc. We're not seeing that as members. As far as consultants are concerned, we seem to be spending a lot on consultants in the past. I've been around 7 years. We don't seem to be making very much use of elected members who are on the front line. I think we need to start doing more of that. If we're going to hire consultants, I think we have to make sure those consultants work with elected members. I know it's not what we're discussing today, but it would make a lot of difference to costs, because elected members know quite a bit and parish councillors know quite a bit. We're not taking advantage of that. We're spending money on consultants that quite often, frankly, are not doing their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. Quite a few of my questions have been answered. There are some things that I will be looking at the next week, and one of them relates to page 37 of the public report pack. Number 21 is about the economy and environment, where it's saying that economy and environment are only due to deliver 68% of their 400,000 saving. So it'd be quite good to see where we're at next week. The other two last really minor points was that at number 46, which is page 40, is that what I find really frustrating in reports is that when there is a clear statement like Talk Community ran another successful holiday activity fund program during the summer with more children attending than 21, but actually there's no figures with it. It's like, yeah, great, it could be one more, two more. I'm being very cynical. The use of acronyms within the reports, again, for us, like going back to page 36, CIN, LOBO, whatever, RIO, I keep asking for a glossary. I think it would be really, particularly for members of the public. We might know what we're talking about, but many won't, who will be. And last but not least is that in Appendix 5, there's under CRR 78, what does it mean by impact of statutory direction?
What page?
Can you read out the page number again, please?
Yeah, it's in Appendix 5 and it's CRR 78.
Sorry, Appendix 5, not Appendix
That's on the
E.
risk register.
What page?
Is that the delivery plan dashboard?
Yeah,
the risk
delivery
rating
plan
agency,
dashboard.
Yeah, it's a delivery plan dashboard.
And what part of the delivery plan?
And it's number CRR78. It's there's no page number with it, but it's under corporate risk.
The page number is at the top of the screen on the top left-hand corner.
All right, okay.
So which page
I
is it?
think is that in the corporate risk section?
Yeah. so risk
Oh,
register.
Yeah. I can't see a page number.
It's in the grey bar above the moving.
So the corporate risk section,
Yeah, so it's this one here, corporate risks, and it's the last line where there is the
in
coloured.
community. So we're in the
Yeah.
community dashboard. On the very last page, there's corporate risks, and it's CRR 0.78. The risk is impact of statutory direction.
And it's a red, so
So
I don't understand what it means.
I don't know if, Mr. Lovegrove, if you,
I don't have that information to hand, but we can certainly find that out for you.
Yeah, but actually, even just like impact of statutory direction, does it need to be reworded? Because does that mean from a leadership or executive?
There is something called a statutory direction,
Mm,
and if we receive one, it will have a significant impact.
okay.
Yeah.
Right, I'll wait for the briefing
It's a
note
thing.
or whatever is.
I think if in the audit and governance papers, when the corporate risk register is reported, it has all the details of each of the risks with a description.
Mm,
So we could perhaps direct you to that.
okay, thank you. That's over and out.
Right, so we are almost at 12, we are at 12:20, so I will ask the clerk to summarise on recommendations and actions as a result of our discussion. I think it's been quite a heated and we've covered a number of different things, so.
Excuse me.
Oh, yes, you may.
Thank you. So I think we've captured one action, which we've suggested goes to Cabinet initially, and it needs to move our action from Cabinet to audit and governance. But all delivery plan actions should have progress updates, reported measures, improvement target figures reported rather than just green, orange, and grey boxes. Otherwise, green boxes. And this is fed into the improvements being considered for Q3 reporting.
Now, that was a recommendation as opposed to an action.
That was.
Yeah, sorry, just for
So
clarification.
that's the recommendation. In terms of actions, there was an action from Councillor Howes, I believe, that the interventions to try and bring early help forward in terms of managing that as part of the risk could be built into the children and young people's presentation of the budget. Then we had an action in relation to Cabinet providing SMB with the full details of the Council's recovery plan and actions that the administration is taking to address the overspend. Action that a briefing note is prepared and provided on what learning has been established, with particular focus on whether the £6 million was predicted or unexpected. And another action, SMB to arrange a session with the Section 151 officers, Cabinet member, to discuss how the data is presented to ensure clearer explanations can be extrapolated from the performance reporting.
And that's around the capital budgeting.
Yeah. And then I think this is the final action, that a description of how the budget setting process is taken forward will be provided ahead of the budget meeting on the 17th of January.
I think there were a couple of other actions. I'm not quite sure whether we need to note them or not. I think the use of glossaries, I mean, it's a standard one in all reports. The appendices for the full Cabinet paper, including appendices, need to be included into our report pack. And also where there might be significant areas of outturn, we invite the cabinet member responsible to our meeting.
And where they make a statement, where there's an officer makes a statement, they qualify it. Like, you know, what I said about talk community, there's been an improvement in numbers, but there's no numbers to demonstrate change from last year to this year.
Can I just ask, on the 6 million, it might be worth just explaining that that is the unexpected 6 million figure that was spent in Q1. That's what we're actually particularly asking for. I know it'll be understood, but it doesn't actually say that, so if other people read it, just so they know that's what we were specifically referring to.
Any other committee members with comments on that?
Councillor Harvey wants
No,
to
I
say
know.
something.
Any other committee members first?
Is it still not something on the robustness of the capital programme that's sent to full council? Are we happy with the answers we've been given today? And
Well, I
whether
think,
the starting point is the best we can get?
I think if we work in improving the reports, I think that might be a
That might
recommendation
get
that
it, it
comes
comes
out
out
for next
later.
week.
Okay, fine.
That's
Okay.
okay.
Right.
Any other comments from committee members before I go to councillor
Okay.
Harvey for cabinet
Fine,
member
fine.
response?
As long as we don't lose sight of it.
Yeah, we have it as an action. No, so councillor Harvey, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things, Chair. I mean, as a scrutiny committee, it is for you to say who you would like to attend your meetings.
I agree.
It is entirely within your gift. I think you need to decide who it is you wish to summon to your meetings. You know, heaven forfend that, you know, I would wish to share this delight with my cabinet colleagues. But you know, this is, if you're going to be scrutinising service area stuff rather than the budget and the performance outturn and the quarterly forecast reports, I think we all need to be clear who you want to be here and why. And just referring back to the question about statutory direction, we have received a statutory direction. It is published on the government website. It's associated with children's services. It was published on the 21st of September, and it requires the council to cooperate with a commissioner appointed by the Secretary of State for Education. And that is an example of a statutory direction.
Okay. Thank you, councillor Harvey. So I think if everyone is comfortable with that one recommendation and number of actions that we've articulated, can I please see a show of hands? Fabulous. It is currently 12:28. What I suggest is we take a 5-10-minute recess, 10-minute recess, so everyone can refresh their cups, etc.
Are we definitely going to finish at 1 o'clock? Because we're only down for 3 hours.
We've got treasury management to go, and then the last two agenda items, I'm
Different.
yes. So it will be just the treasury management discussion. And the gentleman from Link Group wasn't able to attend till 12:30. So this is the earliest.
I know, I agree.
Treasury management. Sorry. I missed my 8. There we go, sorry about that. Are we live yet, Matt?
Not quite yet, sorry, it's taking a bit of time. There you go, live now. No.
Right, thank you, we're now live. Yes, thank you very much, everyone returning. We are now, do we have Richard Busson yet? I guess he's online, fabulous. Welcome, Richard, who's from Link Treasury Services. Thank you for attending today. We're going to start with agenda item 8 now, which is Treasury Management Strategy 23-24 to 26-27 and the minimum reserve provision review. The purpose of this report is to consider and note the Treasury Management Strategy and Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Review prepared by the Council's External Treasury Management Advisors Link Group. The Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24 to 26-27 is attached to Appendix A. It includes the proposed borrowing and investment strategy, the Council's expected minimum revenue provision, and the associated prudential indicators. I would like to note at this juncture the minimum revenue provision review, which is set out in Appendix B, has been exempt under paragraph 3, Schedule 12A, Local Government Act 1972. As such, if any members wish to discuss the content of this report, I will look to draw a short pause in the public meeting and move into private session to consider this item. I do believe that some members would like to discuss this exempt report. So I would like to firstly invite Mr. Andrew Lovegrove, the Head of Strategic Finance, to present the key issues set out in the report, and then we will stop the live stream and ask members of the public to leave the room so we can move into private session for a short period of time before then recommencing with the live stream. So Mr. Lovegrove, if you can introduce the report, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going into great detail about the report. The Strategy Management Strategy, what you see before you is the latest iteration of the current strategy. There are no fundamental changes proposed, but it is for you to consider and then decide whether you want to have any amendments. Both of these documents will then make their way through to full council on the 10th of February. Recommendations from these.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove. Can I please ask that the live stream be paused?
This one. You are very bullish there, Philip. You're very bullish there.
Back. We are discussing agenda item 8, Treasury Management Strategy 23-24 to 26-27, and I would like to welcome questions from committee members on the Treasury Management Strategy. Anyone like to kick off? Councillor Swindle first.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. One is I think paragraph 2.6, appendix A, short-term loans. Currently, council doesn't have any short-term loans. The proposal is to limit to 50%. Why 50%, not 40 or 45 or 30 or 10 or 70? Why 50?
Is that a question for Mr. Lovegrove?
I guess.
Specific?
Is it? Yes.
Chair, we don't have any short-term loans, so it is a slightly academic position on there. It's hard to envisage for the foreseeable future us wanting to dip into short-term loans arrangement, and short-term loans to fund long-term capital expenditure, in my opinion, is always a slightly bizarre situation on there. There are some councils who have been very active on short-term loans and they see a financial benefit. I personally don't, but in terms of the question why 50%, there's no particular science around that. It's just a reasonable position to take that we wouldn't want to get.
So why would our policy then not say we wouldn't encourage short-term loans, full stop?
There may be a situation, and obviously this is a strategy, so it has to allow for all eventualities. There may get to a point where we need to borrow money to fund our capital programme for whatever reason, the market isn't able to provide a long-term loan. I know this is a pretty extreme example, but you could get to that situation. So I would then have to look at some short-term loans to fund that additional expenditure. Clearly our existing loan book, which is all long-term, sits there. So we'd have to borrow an awful lot on short-term to get above 50%. But my advice would be you need to have some headroom for short-term, just in case.
It just struck me as actually quite high, 50%,
I
in terms of where the safety
lower
net
figure, I
is.
think,
Quite a
as long as we
high.
have some headroom, you may
Yeah.
want to move, say, 25% or 30%.
Well, it's not for me to say, I think, but it's just.
That's the rationale.
Could it not be that we wouldn't encourage this sort of loan, but in the exceptional circumstance, it would need to be approved by the appropriate approval level?
Well, this strategy is setting out those approval levels.
Yeah.
So,
This seems quite high.
I'm not sure who the approval will be because this strategy delegates to the Statutory Office of 151 to live on these parameters. So I think if it's your view, and I'd very happy to have that debate.
Well, I think it's enough for us simply that, I would be content to simply let's recorded that we've asked a question, we've raised just a question mark over it, and because not I certainly don't feel qualified to say whether it is or isn't an appropriate level and what an appropriate level would be, given that it should be evidence based and not just kind of well let's do that or that or that. But it's sort of whether we've remarked upon and noted it. That I think was where I was going with that. If that's all right, Chair.
Maybe Councillor Harvey, from an administrative perspective, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think what I'd like to do is to emphasise that, as Mr. Lovegrove has said, this is the strategy that then, under delegation to him, he then and his team act within. And when it comes to leaping on the opportunities to borrow money at fixed rates for certain periods of time, our finance team need to be able to do that quickly when the opportunities arise. And, when the money markets and, the borrowing opportunities are there, they're not always there for very long. Which is why we set this strategy out in advance, so that in the eventuality that it is judged the right thing to do, they have the authority to act immediately in order to buy the council the best position.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I have my second question, paragraph 2.10. So it's great the council's actively pursuing ESG, which is environment, social and governance investments. Obviously, there's a relationship with security, liquidity and yield. I'd be interested in if actually in our existing investments, if we are investing directly or indirectly in banks or institutions that are funding, for instance, something like petrochemical industries. We've got 10% currently in ESG funds, and how does that align with the climate and ecological emergency that the council's declared?
Councillor Harvey?
I think I'm going to have to pass on that one to the detail.
This is very much an evolving part of the market, and we can't influence the market, we have to be reactive to the market. So at the moment we have £5 million invested in Barclays Green Deposit 95-day notice account. So that's a product that Barclays have brought to the market, which invests in particular green type investments. There's a process where Barclays will get accreditation for that. So we've invested in that amount. The issue we've got there, and I think it's alluded to in 2.8, if we can think back to the financial problems in 2007 and 2008, when all the banking crisis happened, and we had the bail-in situation, so governments around the world bailed out all the banks. Those rules have now been changed, and it's a bail-in arrangement. So if we have another financial crash and you have a significant amount invested in a bank and there's a problem, governments are unlikely to provide cash to bail those banks out. What they will say to those large investors, well, because of this problem, your X million pound investment in that bank has now become, in effect, shares of that bank, and it's locked in for a period of time and you can't get your money back. That's a very sort of simplistic view, but that's the changes we're alluding to. So there is an issue about investing in any bank if there's a problem, can we get our money back? So the three issues, security, liquidity and yield, this is public money, so what we're looking for is a very secure investment, so making sure who we're lending our money to is robust, has all the checks and balances in place, but also has the liquidity to actually pay us the money back when it's due. And these are all short-term investments, so maximum is a year. A lot of them can be, for a few days or overnight, or if we have this one here, 95 days. So whilst we're happy that banks are secure, the liquidity and the arrangements around banks, banking arrangements, the banks don't have all that cash that is onward invested. So you've got to bear in mind some of those items. So in terms of the dynamic security versus liquidity, that's a dynamic in there. I think this area will improve, and I think there will be organisations, there are organisations that are bringing more ESG type focused investment options come to the market, and certainly we keep a very active eye and we'll look at those and evaluate them, but at the moment they're not there. So that's what that point is trying to, probably look at rewording that.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to put further on that point though, like section 5.2 on page 10 talks about a borrowing objective, but there's no environmental, social or governance issues built into that borrowing objective. So is that something that potentially could be injected? And who makes the decision as well that, say the yield, because it says that ESG issues must play a subordinate role to security, liquidity and yield, but who makes that decision? And I can understand security and potentially liquidity essential, but in terms of the yield, who makes the decision that a higher yield is better than having something that's more environmentally sustainable? So I've got two questions. One, could there be something injected into the borrowing objective to support ESG and our declaration of a climate emergency? And then who makes the decision of yield versus the options of something more environmentally sustainable?
So picking up with the borrowing point and 5.2, that is about where the council would borrow money from a third party. So I think the third party would be more interested in what we would do with the money we borrowed from them rather than where they got their sources of money, but I think we can have a look at it. I'm certainly not aware of any organisations that are lending money or lent money that has come from an ESG perspective. I'm very happy to go in and have a look at that in terms of that. Within the documents, there are various sections about security and yield. This is a very conservative, small c, risk-averse treasury management strategy, and I fully support that. I'm not proposing any changes. So we are not getting the best yield. I should be quite open about that fact, because the biggest factor for me is the company that we're lending the money to sound? The next factor is, are they going to give it back when they're due to give it back? That's a liquidity question. And those are the two primary ones. That's why I refer to it as public money. What yield we get is the third, and that's the nice to have, rather than I don't want to have to come to this committee and say, well, it's a really good investment, but by the way, they won't give us the cash back, because I think that would be a career limiting conversation to have with you as a committee. It's the plainest way of putting it. So that, very much we focus on there. So another way of asking that question: could we get more yield by investing in a different way? Yes, we could. But my advice to you is that opens you up to a whole raft of risks. It's public money. My advice is let's not go there. And if you see in the letter tables where it talks about the security and the strength of the covenant on the other side, that's very much, there's no change there. I think that is a safe place to be investing in money.
Okay, and Councillor Harvey, did you have a comment on that?
Yes, I did. Just to reinforce those points. I mean, we have in the past sort of borrowed money from and lent it to other local authorities. And recently, I mean, local authorities are a bit like banks, you kind of expect them to be there for forever and it not to be a problem. But we've seen that, with continuing sort of policy of austerity and, the impact that the government's approach to funding local government is having on the financial stability of local authorities, that some local authorities are now starting to wobble, and some severely so. Is it a 141 notice
Yes,
that
yeah.
that some are saying that they simply can't deliver balanced budgets and that sort of thing. So we did have an example of a council that we had lent money to that got into difficulty. They paid back at the end of the loan period on the dot, as they had signed up to do so. But it's an example of the whole sort of borrowing lending environment being slightly different and less stable now than it has been as a consequence of events, dear boy, things going on in the world.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Watson.
Yeah. I've got what might be some silly questions, is that for 2.1, it says that the financial, on page 5 of the strategy, it says that the financial market continues to offer low levels of interest rate for the cost of borrowing, and even lower interest rates return on investments. And for my own personal bank, is that I was really pleasantly surprised that my banks have given me really good interest rates on, for investments. But maybe I'm just misunderstanding what this paragraph says, because I thought at the moment there is good interest being paid within money in the bank. I understand that we have got some with some low interest rates, and I have seen that, but when we're looking at low risk investments, it's kind of like, I'm just confused by the statement. So that was my first question. And in 5.1, it's asking about the likelihood of spending, it's got 5.1, it's saying current capital expenditure forecast suggests that there will be further capital spend financed by borrowing before the end of the financial year. If spend slips and or cash balances remain high, then the need to borrow will be deferred. But it's about, what is the current likelihood of the spend slipping and the cash balancing remaining high at this moment in time?
Well, we're returning to the earlier conversation about the capital programme. I mean, this is the upside of the downside. If the programme slips, we don't have to borrow so much as we expected to, and therefore the revenue provision that we had made in the budget to service that borrowing is able to be released and used for other things. But then you don't get the capital project delivered that is seen as being either economically important or, important in some other way. It might be a school extension or whatever. So, it swings and roundabouts. I mean, the thing to do is to have a capital programme that delivers what you need to support your policy priorities and to make the progress that you want to across all of the strategies that the council signed up to, and that you deliver it to time and to budget or less than budget, and everybody gets on with doing what they need to do to take advantage of the new facility, whatever it is, once it's been delivered. Doesn't happen. So what this is saying is, there is in the capital programme a requirement to borrow in order to finance a proportion of the programme. If some of the programme slips, then there will be less of a requirement to borrow.
Okay, no, it's just to explain it, do you know what I mean? And thanks for doing that, Councillor Harvey. My last 2 points is that I know that we discussed it earlier, is that who defines prudent provision in Herefordshire Council?
Well, Mr. Lovegrove is the arbiter. What the administration does is work with our officers and the leadership team to come to the best overall built budget that we can, taking into account the Treasury Management Strategy and all the other documents that, you know, we've sort of signed up to and that we work within, and the advice that Link and others provide us with. And then Mr Lovegrove takes a view in the round statutorily as the 151 officer as to whether he considers overall it is a prudent overall budget. And that is a professional opinion wielded in the same way as our officers wield their professional opinions on umpteen other things every single day.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Well, comprehensive. And my last question is around page 17 of the Treasury Management Strategy, and it's about the grants, contributions and capital receipts, which has actually got an implication, I think, for MP as well. Is that in the forecast and the estimate, it's nearly double, do you know what I mean, from the forecast to the actual, can someone explain?
That's 22, 23, and then 23, 24.
Oh, okay, I've, yeah. Yes. I need to wear my glasses. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Summers next, please.
Not a lot I can add because I'm not that good with money, as I mentioned before. But I think the 151 officer has to have the flexibility of movement. For example, recent events at central government with money. I know quite a few Canadians that made money by buying pounds when they dropped and stuff like that. So that's, you never know when that's going to become available. So those kind of investments need to be open to 151 officers because they're very, very narrow plans. That can be a day. Now, money markets fluctuate quite a bit, so I'm not suggesting that we get involved with money markets, but there are other things too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Summers. I have Councillor Howes and then Councillor Stark.
Yeah, thank you. I've got two questions, one on borrowing and one on our investment strategy. So on borrowing, particularly on the Public Works Loan Board, our external borrowing is heavily dominated by the PWLB. But that's very much government controlled, and recently, for example, they put interest rates up quite substantially to stop people borrowing more money, so to limit how much they were willing to lend, because they thought local authorities were borrowing too much. With that page, that actually put a huge strain on authorities that used Public Works Loan Board for suddenly increasing the amount of money they're having to repay. And I think for that purpose, and I can't remember what it's called now, there's a local government funding body which has much greater flexibility and understands that actually a sudden boost in interest rates to prevent people borrowing actually puts councils at a big disadvantage. So what are we looking at, and do we look at the local government funding option? Because I think the public loan board route is actually quite risky because it is subject to government interference and sudden increase in costs. First question.
That's a really key point in terms of where we borrow money when we need to borrow. On there, Public Works Loan Board, you are borrowing from government and it's a fixed rate and it's a straightforward process. So there are advantages from that point of view because your counterparty is HM government on there, and history has proven that it is definitely a fixed rate. Prior to 15 years ago, they actively encouraged people to refinance. So if you repay loans and take new ones out, they've changed their position 15 or 16 years ago, so that there are penal rates if you want to repay a loan early. So that's a downside of the Public Works Loan Board. But in terms of other places to borrow, the banks are pretty much ruled out in terms of long-term borrowing because they have to have, in fact, risk factors built into their zone. So it's very unlikely for local authority to borrow long-term now from the bank because anything over 5 years they have to build in a risk premium into their calculation. So you have to ask yourself what's left. So the various corporate bonds and local authority bonds arrangements, I mentioned the corporate finance company is an option, and certainly at the point when we need to borrow, we will make sure we consider all those options and evaluate everything's available, and Link will advise us on that front. So at a point where we need to borrow, we will certainly look at those options and what is the best option. We haven't borrowed for quite a while, and so we just have the conversation. When we'll borrow is probably the next 12 to 18 months, depending on capital spend. So we'll certainly look at those options in terms of that, but you make the decision best on the day with the best advice and developing what's available in the market at that point.
So you don't see that our proportion, 91% of our external borrowing coming to the Public Works Loan Board, you don't see that changing much because of the potential options that are not available.
I can't see us repaying loans early because that attracts a significant financial penalty, which is designed to be a deterrent. So it would have to be a very strange set of circumstances where we would have to pay a premium price to repay a loan, just to refinance it.
Okay, so my second point was about our investment policy. For my sins, I was appointed as our Lower Severn Internal Drainage Board representative 4 years ago, which I thought would be pretty obscure, but actually very interesting. And one of the things I've particularly done is I'm on their Treasury Committee, and they are governed by similar rules. They're like a local authority. And the contrast between their investment strategy and ours is quite significant. And I'm looking at this, I'm quite surprised. It isn't just conservative, we have an ultra-conservative investment policy. And of the 3 issues of security, liquidity and yield, yeah, it's very high on security and liquidity, but it's extremely low on yield. And I'm quite concerned about that, given particularly we've got inflation rates, that actually all our investments are losing money, because even without inflation, the returns are not as great as an inflation rate. So I think we should seriously review whether, sorry, she's gone to sleep. We should seriously review our investment strategy. So, for example, the Lower Severn Internal Drainage Board, and one of the reasons might be because of their capital requirements. They have to invest very heavily in expensive pumps that pump the water away from flood areas. So they have a significant portfolio of tracked and non-tracked funds, UK-based, European-based, world-based, and you can take ESG considerations into account, and they do. But they get a significant return, which is greater than the rate of inflation. In fact, we had a discussion the other day about tracked and non-tracked, and I found out that the non-tracked were performing significantly less well than the tracked, for example. We had a debate about how they invest. Now, we do none of those investments. And it seems to me that there's a really strong case to say that we should be considering being less ultra-conservative and actually investing some of our money in those sort of funds, because they've been doing it for years. And they've made money out, well, several years at least, and they've certainly made money out of it. And why don't we do it? And should we be reviewing investing some of money specifically on yield? I'm very satisfied that we obviously look after liquidity and security, but I think it's too much probably. I think we should seriously review a significant chunk of our investment going into optimum yield for the moment, isn't it?
So perhaps Andrew, and then followed by Liz, if you can comment on that challenge, please.
No, certainly, Chair. And it picks up the point Councillor Watson made in section 2.1 of the strategy. The reality is that the amount we earn on interest is always below inflation, and that's a product of monetary policy in the UK and the developed world in terms of those arrangements, and has been such for an awful long time. So any cash we hold, we have to accept we are not going to, in fact, the buying power decreases on that. And I think, as we touched on earlier, this council is under borrowed, so we use any spare cash to in effect offset the cost of borrowing. So rather than investigate in different ways, we do that. So but that is a policy that we've had, and I'm not suggesting we revisit that. I think that works very well. I have worked in authorities who have a very different approach, that as soon as anything goes in the capital programme that is funded from borrowing, they immediately draw the loan down, and you don't have lots of cash to invest, and you don't have many hundreds of millions of cash pens to do that. I guess it comes down to a number of factors. Our cash flow goes up and down. It fluctuates quite significantly. That's just the nature of local authorities. When governments give us grants, they tend to give us cash in advance. Sometimes they don't, and it's about the, so our cash balance does fluctuate. So if we're going to invest for a slightly longer term, we've got to be really confident that we don't need that back in a hurry on that. And the policy at the moment is very much, it is sterling bank deposit investments only. And then, as Councillor Watson point of view, as a domestic customer, we're bombarded by our local banks. Well, if you set up a monthly saver, you'll get this, a trigger rate for 12 months, 18 months, those type of things. The professional investor, as we're classed, we're not offered those rates. So if you put money in an instant access bank account, and the best we're offered at the moment, well, as of Friday, that West highest is 0.8%, because they don't want to have that. into access. So there is a disconnect between to move to investing in other types of investments, i.e. non-sterling deposits, is certainly an option, but I think we'd have to think very carefully about that because you're then exposed to market risk on that. So, and then you get back into liquidity. So if you're saving up for a large capital item, you're saving up, that makes complete sense to put the money aside. But we're not in that position. We're just investing our spare cash. But I'm very happy we can come back to another meeting to weigh out the pros and cons. But at the moment, by investing in those type of investments, we can get a better return. But you have to accept you have some market volatility. So an example is there is a widely publicised property fund that invests in commercial property that is marketed for local authorities. And interestingly, when you read the small print, they can delay when you get your cash out. So when it's first set up, and certainly heavily marketed 5-10 years ago, don't worry, you can get your money out within a week. They changed that to 90 days because whether investing in commercial risk, and they've now, since October, I've just checked on the website, they've restricted getting cash out for 6 months. So we have to be slightly careful about understanding the different risk dynamic, but I think it's worth a further conversation and to evaluate it because the world is changing in terms of investment return. The interest rates are going up, so it's something we need to have a look at. So very happy to bring back, probably put on the work programme, another paper looking at different options in terms of different assets to classes to invest in.
If I can just interrupt, I'm conscious we are coming up to 2 o'clock. We have been here for a long time. I do have Councillor Stark.
2 points.
Do I have any?
Sorry, before we do that, can I just pick up on what?
Can I just ask, are there any other questions on the floor? I've got 1 or 2. So it'll be Councillor House finishing, Councillor Stark, I've got 1 or 2, and then we'll close on this.
So taking up Mr. Ludlow's point, could you make a recommendation that we review our investment strategy with a view to saying whether some should be shifted to higher yield type investments to counteract the effects of low interest rates not meeting the rate of inflation and the rate of inflation actually increasing? We look at some investments that could give us greater yield to review our investment strategy.
Just to be clear, because I think Andrew said that the current policy is the current policy that would go forward in this strategy. So we're looking at a future date.
And offered to review our investment strategy, yes, to consider higher yield investments.
So to review our investment strategy, a recommendation to Cabinet that in the next financial year to review the relationship of
security, liquidity and yield. Yes, to consider some investments that offer higher yield.
That's it.
Chair, could I suggest a slight amendment to that? I think that to bring clarity to the arrangement, I think that this strategy as it's written, recommendations to Cabinet and then on to Council that's adopted. What I was suggesting is you put into your work programme a piece of work to review the options. You then, after that, you may want to consider making further recommendations, but to try and draft a recommendation that sort of puts an element of lack of clarity about the decisions on the 10th of February, I think will probably confuse people. I think to be fair, we need to do the work before we get into that situation.
Yeah, happy with that. Yeah.
Is that something for our committee to do, or for the administration / officers, not for this year but for next year?
It's a recommendation to Council.
Or a full motion at the Council.
Constitutionally, I think Treasury Management sits with this committee. So I think that you're tasked with overseeing Treasury Management matters. Yeah. So I think that the first protocol to do that would be sit within the boundaries of this committee.
As the recommendation stands, you're not going to be recommending anything other than it comes back to the committee.
And we review and make recommendations to Cabinet as a result.
Okay, so what have we written, please?
So the investment, the investment strategy is brought back to SMB to consider higher yield investment strategies for security, liquidity, and yield for 2023-24.
With a greater emphasis on yield for some investments.
Well, we said consider higher yield.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Yeah.
Is everyone comfortable with that? So is that but that's not a recommendation. That would be an action then, would it? As opposed to a recommendation, because that's not going to Cabinet. So that will be an action.
It would be an action for this group, yeah.
Okay, comfortable with that, everybody?
I would prefer it to go through full council, but let's.
Well, you could still raise it at full council.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The decision is with full council to agree it.
So I have councillor Stark.
Yes, I'll try and be quick. The deteriorating finances, I just wonder how that's impacting on our treasury management strategy. My concern is by using reserves to mask the overspend may stop us looking at our treasury management strategy in terms of what do we need to change in order to meet the challenges we're having with our overspends. Is there any work going on, Andrew, around that to say how could treasury management strategy change to actually help in terms of perhaps supporting the reduction of some of that overspend? That's the first point. The second point is, and this is something that worries me, we have for years denuded the capital spend on highways. I mean, most of my complaints I get from residents on highways were under-borrowed. Capital programme's down to 6 million. And yet I don't hear any debate today about how can we use the treasury management strategy to provide a better service for our residents. One thing would be to say we'll spend 18 million on highways next year by borrowing an extra 12 million. I don't see that happening, and I do wonder whether we end up in a financial debate about the TMS, but we're not looking at it in terms of what it can deliver in terms of service enhancement and improvement. That's my 2 points, one on deteriorating finances, another one on are we doing enough to actually use the treasury management strategy to actually help the service delivery.
Okay, I'll have a go and follow. Right. Are we using treasury management to help deal with overspends? I don't. Treasury management works really hard for us every year. If you reprise previous end of year reports, you will see that, you know, treasury management has delivered, you know, significant improvements on its budget position in order to offset overspends elsewhere in the organisation. So it does get us out of the poop, and it does it consistently. So our treasury management team do a really good job, but with the best will in the world, they're not going to be able to fill a £6 million hole. And it's not a case of using reserves to mask the position. The budget, as you will see next week, is taking into account the overspend position this year, and is making sure that it is built into the base, because it's an ongoing cost, because it's associated with residential placements to an extent until those placements drop away again. So the cost of that is being built into the base budget for children, so that it is part of how we are forming the balanced budget for next year. But it was an organisational surprise for us this year, and reserves are the only way to plug something so significant. Treasury management, yes, absolutely. Let's look at how we can improve the yield for the investments. But, you know, by the same account, it's worth considering whether we are making best use of our ability to borrow to invest in capital projects and the kind of things that can maybe accelerate economic growth and other things in the county. So I think that's the other side of that coin of a question. As far as borrowing to fix the roads was concerned, we have asked officers what would be required. I mean, the previous administration did a £20 million injection of capital funding into a road improvement programme, because it was capital. It wasn't about maintenance. It was about actually making an investment in improving the network. The problem with that is that money was borrowed over a 40-year period of time, but the investments that were made will not exist for 40 years. You know, you've got a 25-year lifetime, if you like. So we're going to be paying the cost of that borrowing for far longer than the capital investment will itself last. We can't do that. You know, that doesn't stack up. That's not sensible. That's not the way, you know, prudently we should operate. And we're not going to do that. You know, we would have to borrow over 25 years to invest in a capital asset improvement that had a 25-year lifetime. But anyway, we've got to spend, you know, Balfour Beatty tell us, you know, even just to bring the road network that we have up to an acceptable standard everywhere will cost over £315 million. There is no, I mean, when we asked officers, look, you know, what about a 20 million, a 40 million pound capital injection? So what, it's like, you know, a drop in the ocean. It will just mean we're managing a network that's declining at a slightly lower rate than it is at the moment. You know, the only way of fixing the problem with the roads is to fix the structural problem with financing local government. And it's a fundamental financial problem which is created by government policy. You know, and we're not going to fix 315 plus million pounds capital investment any other way. And that's the problem that we've got. You know, do we pour a little bit more money, which is not a little, it's a lot for us if we were going to put 20, 40, 60 million pounds in as an injection. First of all, where are the contractors to do it? You know, you can't make them appear out of nowhere. So it would be a 5 or a 10-year programme that would be needed to gradually spend that money. But even so, it's a drop in the ocean when we're facing that level of degraded network as a consequence of no funding. You know, and the funding that we get, the money that we get, the net revenue that we get from car parking and that sort of thing, that goes into funding the public realm and road maintenance programme that we have. We have capital funds that we get an element of from central government, but nowhere near enough to actually deal with the level of capital investment that our road network needs just to stand still. You know, we've inherited a declining network and it continues to decline. And it needs a radical rethink in terms of local government funding in order to address it. And it's not just us, it's everybody. It's everywhere.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
That's useful, yes. I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah.
So I have 2 last questions, and then we'll reflect on any recommendations and actions. I only just wanted to bring this up again because I think we touched on it slightly when we were in the closed session, and for the purposes of the people listening or members of the public, I just wanted to come back in terms of the main assurances around that we can rely upon as a committee that this treasury management strategy is robust. Now, we've got the involvement of the Treasury Management Consultants Link Group that give us a degree of assurance that this is a robust strategy, and I guess it's just asking sort of what other assurances can we be relying upon. Now, I understand there's external audit, who do their value for money, and going back to their April 22 report, they talked about strengthening the MFTS to ensure reserves are sufficient to meet possible pressures, and also improving the reporting of the capital programme, including slippage. So I just wanted to get assurance that those elements are being addressed, but also understanding what does external audit look at in terms of treasury management, and if there's any other assurances other than link services and external audit that we can be relying upon. So I think probably Andrew for the specific questions.
That's Rachel too.
Thank you. So currently we have internal audit looking at treasury management as well as an internal review. External audit will look at the treasury management strategy as part of their financial resilience and sustainability under their value for money audit. And alongside that, the budget monitoring reports throughout the year will be reviewed by external audit to form part of their assurance of the activity in the year.
So is it possible as a committee for us, if internal audit are doing a specific review on treasury management, for us to get visibility to that report, because that would support us in what we're doing? Could that be an action? When is that due to be completed?
The internal review is starting in the next month, so that should conclude within the quarter.
Great, thank you. And then my other question was just process one. In the policy statement on page 25, I believe, of our pack, section 3.1, the second bullet point, indicates that full council shall receive as a minimum annual strategy and plan, mid-year report, and annual report after its close. Is this actually the situation? Because I think we only get the annual strategy and plan. Is that correct? And I think then it's Cabinet that receives the mid-year report and annual report.
I'm struggling to find that in the papers.
Policy statement, it's the policy statement.
Which document is it?
Page 25, is it page 25 of our pack? That's page 25 of our pack. Treasury Management Strategy Appendix D, or Annex E, is a Treasury Management Policy Statement. So page 25, it's the first bullet point at the top of the page. Full council will receive reports on treasury management policies, practices and activities, including as a minimum an annual strategy and plan in advance of the year, a mid-year review and an annual report after its close. Page 25 of that pack.
Chair, we'll have a look at this and make sure that clearly if things have to come to the formal agenda for full council, we'll make sure that.
I mean, is it appropriate that, because I appreciate that Cabinet, I think, receive the mid-year review and annual report after it's closed, does it? Because that comes in the performance report.
I think we probably need to take this offline, have a look at what the Constitution says as well and see whether that is aligned to here. Sounds like it's either this document or the Constitution needs to change. So we'll have a look at that, and before this gets to full council on the 10th of February, we'll confirm that.
Great, thank you. Okay, that was my points. If I can look to John to summarise, please.
So there was the recommendation made in our earlier private session, which I won't read out for the purposes of this meeting. And then there are two actions. The first being the investment strategies brought back to SMB to consider higher yield investment strategies for security, liquidity and yield for 2023-24. Yeah, so in regard to the internal review reporting,
the internal audit report.
Yeah, the internal audit report. The action was that the report would be made available to SMB to be able to review. And then there's the final action, which Andrew, you provided to give us a response to, which is in relation to section 3.1 in Appendix D, where you'll provide a response to those questions.
Everyone happy with those?
Happy?
Yeah. Can I see a show of hands supporting those? Thank you very much. I think we only have a few more things to, I think we can move through them fairly quickly. We're up to agenda item 10, scrutiny report, review on human resources and workforce strategy. With the agreement of the committee, I move that this item is deferred and considered at our next meeting on the 17th of January. A short report is being prepared and it will be published with the papers. We'll probably send it out this afternoon, hopefully. So show of hands on that one, please, number 10. Thank you. Number 11, scrutiny development report. Once again, with the agreement of the committee, I move that this item is deferred and considered at our meeting in March. A report has been prepared but is not ready for publication. And I think it will align with our reviewing of our effectiveness for the year. So can I see a show of hands for that one as well, please? Thank you very much. So that moves us on to item number 12, the progress report. Now with this progress report, I think there has been, I think we talked about this at our last meeting, and we were asking for a better template to be prepared, which has been, the template has been prepared, but there's not very much information in it. So I guess for this, for today, I would probably ask that if you're comfortable with the template in terms of, because there's a table in the back of it, if you're happy with the structure of this report, I will work with scrutiny officer to make sure it's populated correctly. So when we bring it back to the next, because I think a number of the items will be cleared off next week when we have our budget meeting, but there are a number of other things that are still outstanding, but we don't have progress updates on. So given the timeliness of this meeting, if you're happy with the structure of it and the layout of it, I'll work with the clerk or John to complete it so it's fully robust for our March meeting. Councillor Summers?
Just a concern with working with John has got other things to do when we have the new clerk. So I'm not sure whether it's beneficial to go through it with John. You need to go through it with the new clerk as far. It just seems to be time that.
The appropriate person.
Appropriate person, okay, because that doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Is everyone happy with that? Show of hands, please. Thank you. So that leads us on to our work programme, agenda item 13. We're almost through our work programme. We've got our meeting next week to discuss the budget, which then leaves our March meeting. I think it currently is scheduled for the 13th, but I have one question about PERDA, whether we can actually have our meeting during PERDA.
No, I don't think so.
So we may need to.
We can, yes.
Yeah.
We've had
I guess.
ESS
John.
So we publish guidance on the pre-election planning period. So meetings can still go ahead as long as it's business as usual. So we will just need to take a review of what's on the agenda to ensure that it does fall into that category.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of the March agenda in our work plan is massive once again. So I would like to recommend that we drop Q3 budget performance reports. We refine our agenda for March, 1, to address Hoople, 2, the development of scrutiny, which details the agreed role of the approach to the scrutiny committee and really sets out the stalls of what scrutiny was meant to achieve. And then we have a review of scrutiny effectiveness in our annual report, because I think it's really important. We've tried to do things differently this year. Our budget meeting next week is going to be slightly different to how we've done it previously. So I think we do need a period of reflection where we say, well, you know, in our development of scrutiny report, we'll say, well, these are all the things that we should have done. Have we done it? Did things work or didn't things work? And then the fourth element for our meeting would be looking at the budget scrutiny for the next year and taking our reflections to say, well, this is how scrutiny would like to tackle the next budget process. So then it's whatever committee then takes over in May has quite a bit of that work already undertaken. So that would be my suggestion for the work plan for March. Councillor Summers.
Along with Hoople, can we put in, bring in stuff back in-house rather than we brought in PROWs, it's moving very slowly. We need to, if we're looking at Hoople, we need to look at all that. As far as I can tell, I'm not sure if we can mesh it together or not. I don't know, but I think someone needs to look at it.
I think we will need to have further meetings with officers to further refine our specific information requests in terms of what we want to cover with people, so we can consider that as part of that request.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Councillor Harding?
Yes, just a couple. I mean, bringing services in-house will fall to whichever of the scrutiny committees is responsible for that particular service area. On the budget process, I'm not sure what communication has gone out to councillors who sit on the other scrutiny committees, but I'm aware, I've bumped into several who are not aware whether or not they are to be invited as councillors in attendance to next Tuesday, and to make time in their diaries to come along to the SMB meeting and be able to ask questions in the room. So if that can be clarified, and also the running order in which you're going to be examining the different directorate budgets, so that people can know roughly when their committee's area of responsibility is going to be covered in the course of the meeting, so that they don't necessarily have to give the whole time over to it, plus whether or not a 3-hour meeting is actually realistic for this.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. That's a very good point. We've got a planning session immediately after this to go through next week's meeting, so we can address those during that. Any other points on the work plan?
It's just about the effectiveness of the scrutiny and the scrutiny development. Both are reviewing. You know what I mean? It's about statement and review, and I'm just wondering about the order.
The order,
Yeah,
yes.
the order.
My recommendation is we start with Hoople, we then do
Yeah.
development of scrutiny,
Yeah, great.
we then do review of scrutiny effectiveness and annual report, and then budget scrutiny for 23-24.
I'm happy with that.
Okay, everyone happy with that work plan? Sure, Councillor Harvey?
Sorry, I should have said, we have a report coming to Cabinet this week, which is proposing to an approach to handling responsibility for the council's shareholding in other entities, not just Hoople, but other organisations. So it may be that it's actually the operation of that subcommittee to Cabinet, assuming that the recommendations get approved, that actually falls as a remit to this committee rather than Hoople per se, because Hoople would just be one of the entities that would be managed by that shareholder committee.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. Show of hands on the work plan, please. Happy with that? Thank you very much. And that leaves the date of the next meeting, Tuesday the 17th.
When's the time meeting for
that? I don't think we have a pre-brief
No, we don't have one
meeting
yet.
in the diary yet. I think Vice Chair and myself have a meeting with the Statutory Scrutiny Officer and Andrew Lovegrove to go through a few things after this, to refine some details, and we can try and look at diaries.
What time does the main meeting start? On the 17th?
And we've got it in at 2 p.m, I believe.
Because it's certainly squeezed my committee's options for time as well. And this is something we need to look at. Because I've already had a clash with Connected Communities where we had to move. We've been without a clerk, we've now got a clerk. We've been with a scrutiny officer, we've now not got one. And now I'm finding we're having to have a planning meeting for ESSC on the 18th because of all the time that SNB is taking up. And I don't think that was envisaged when we actually started this off. So we really do need to get a grip as to what SNB is and the impact it has on the other committees and how those other committees then fit into SNB as well. Because I've now got a planning meeting the day before I actually have the ESSC because there's just no other time to fit in because of the SNB. So you've actually become greater in terms of my resource than my original committee. I don't know what others think as well.
Yeah.
And it's an issue for us, it is an issue.
And I think we initially had this meeting for December, and unfortunately.
I know it got delayed, I agree, yeah, there's all sorts of issues
It's
there.
really difficult.
But SNB is looming larger and larger in terms of the overall work of scrutiny. And we need to think about that when it comes to managing scrutiny next year.
Part of our effectiveness review.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you know what time is it going to be on the?
Pardon?
What time is that meeting going to be?
The planning meeting, waste.
So I've got
We're doing waste on the
2:25
19th.
to finish the meeting if we are.
That's the main one. I don't see what's on.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Okay, thank you.